Okay, everyone, good morning and welcome to the Police and Crime panel, and anyone watching on YouTube, of course, from outside. I'd like to welcome Rhiannon Kirk, ACC Rhiannon Kirk, who's joining us for one of the items. Welcome. And I would also mention that should the meeting carry on beyond or still be going at 12 o'clock, it is the national silence today, so we'll just pause for a minute while that's on. I also want to say that this is the last meeting of this panel. Some members may or may not be standing. Some members may be standing and don't make it. And of course, the Police and Crime panel, its makeup is proportionate to the number of councillors across the county, district and county. So there's always changes. So I don't know who's staying and who will come back. That's if I do. But I want to thank you all. I think the meetings have been good-humoured. And I look forward to the new panel taking on, or that the panel meets in a similar vein, really. So thank you all for being members, and we'll, I think, carry on with the meeting as such. I also want to thank Andrea, of course, as our support from DSU, and thank Martin for coming along and everyone else. I've probably forgotten people, but anyway. Apologies for absence. I think it looks as if we're all here.
No, we have one apology for absence, Chair. That's Councillor Philip Burford from the Forest of Dean.
Oh, right, yeah.
We have no substitutes.
Okay, thank you. Pressing on, the minutes of the previous meeting. I'm going to take those as read unless anybody says anything now. That seems quite enough for me to proceed and say that the minutes are accepted, and however all these minutes are being signed or signed off, that will take place. Declarations of interest. Pause a second. Again, can't see anybody. Yep, no one's raised their hand or anything, so we carry on to Martin and the Police and Crime. Your update, please.
Thank you very much, Chair Colin. Can I just reinforce what you said about this is the end of this particular period for the panel and for me going to the pre-election period, I think on Friday. And to say that in the main, it's been a pleasure working with you. I think it's been fair the majority of the time. And I wish you all well in your futures, whatever they hold, success or standing down or people who don't make it, credit to you all. I know you're all there to make the county safer and better and the role that you do. So it's a genuine thank you for that. Chair, there is so much I could cover. So I just selected a few things which I think are particularly relevant to the panel and to the county, but you obviously may well come back with questions. First of all, I think the agenda here is well set and well thought through. I'm particularly looking forward to the presentation on the operating model by ACC Rhiannon Kirk. I have seen it, of course, before. I've lived and breathed it since I became Commissioner. But I think it's a very thoughtful presentation, which takes you through the journey to where we are now and some of the places we hope to go over the next several years. So it's an important presentation with great interest to the public, your constituents, and all the people that you seek to represent. So that's an important one. And of course, the holding into account a key element of the Police and Crime Commissioner's role and yours to scrutinise me in a supportive way. I think that's a very, very useful, it's quite a complicated presentation, so we'll all need to concentrate on that, but I very much welcome that because it does actually set out where we are, where we've been in a very straightforward, honest way, using audited data, which really should not be disputed. So that's helpful. I really can't begin my update without reflecting on very recent events, particularly what happened in Bristol over the weekend. I'm just going to start by absolutely condemning the behaviour of all the people who turned to violence, and the violence which was vicious against a neighbouring force, any police officer. It was absolutely disgraceful. It was absolutely shocking, and I condemn it unreservedly. There is never a reason for violence like that on the streets of the UK or indeed anywhere else. Of course, we need to look deeper to understand not so much what caused it, but how it came about, and make sure that we do not head for a summer of violence and discontent. We have that from time to time in our country. I've lived through several of them, but just let's start by saying how much I condemn that, and I'm sure you would all agree. Mutual aid, we stand by to support across the country. It's part of the strategic policing requirement. It was there long before the strategic policing requirement. Officers for Gloucestershire were sent very rapidly. They were very efficient in their mustering and getting there. They're ready for action in the shortest possible period of time, fully equipped, well commanded. And I say that because just probably about 6 to 8 months ago, I mentioned to the chief, are you ready? Are we ready for that kind of action? He said, yes, I think we are, Martin. And then funny enough, I was actually sat in this office here about a few days later. I said, what's going on? Well, I saw dozens of police vehicles, dog vans flying in here with blue lights. And it was an exercise to be sure that they were ready for such a call, and that could come at any time. So well done to the force, well done to Avon and Somerset. I've received a letter from the Chief Constable there yesterday evening, thanking us for our support. And of course, we are there for them. So that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing, this affects all of us, was the events that followed or caused the very sad death of Sarah Everard. To my mind, and as a vice chair of the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, we've been in discussion about what that means for policing, what that means for the country, and all of us individually and collectively. And it is what they call a seminal moment, a seismic moment, and we need to reflect on that as well. The events on the Clapham Common will again need a lot of reflection and very honest understanding of what happened, why things happened that they did. And we need to go beyond the moment. So a lot of work is underway there to understand what the real underlying causes are for the violence against women and girls, which is prevalent in our society. There is no doubt about that. And what we can do in the short, medium and long term to rectify that situation. It will need a response far beyond policing alone. And that's a lot of the work I've been involved in with colleagues, PCCs up and down the country and other organisations. But at this time, there is some real meaningful change. So it'd be wrong not to mention that. And you can, if you're not careful, have short memories. These are all things that have impacted on the lives of our police officers and our police staff and all the people of Gloucestershire. It's not so long ago we saw the dreadful violence when we saw the killing of George Floyd, and the outpouring of concern and protest and worry about racism in our country. And, unfortunately, the Black Lives Matters tag has got somewhat tainted. I'm not sure if that's fair or not, but Black lives do matter. And there's no doubt that in our country at the moment, we have to really redouble our efforts to make sure that racism has no place in our society. Violence against women and girls has absolutely no place in our society. And violence, as we saw on the streets of Bristol, doesn't come to our county. It has no place in our society. There's three big themes there, which I'll be playing my part as PCC if I'm successful in the next election, and I have no doubt that you will all support. But we have to come together as a county and furthermore as a country across all departments. Colette, I'm not the chair, but is that your hand up? Did you want? Oh, I'll let the chair take the questions, but
no, I'll let you finish talking.
Okay, I think I'm carrying on. Okay, so why do I mention all that? Because they're important, but because when the elections were postponed, I was disappointed about that. It fell to me to revise my police and crime plan. I'm pleased to say that we did not forecast all the issues that were going to happen this year, but it was revised to take account of the Black Lives Matters, the killing of George Floyd, the obvious racism that still pervades our country and all our organisations. We're kidding ourselves if we think it doesn't. And also to the Me Too movement, which I think is very relevant to what's happened around the violence against women and girls. So that was a revised plan. It's important that it stays in there, and it will do. Okay, I want to move on to some of the more current events, if I may. The Safer Streets Fund, you'll have heard that the government has agreed to double the amount of funds available for this round of the Safer Streets Funds. It's something we welcome. It won't change the number of bids that come in. Chair, it's your call whether you want to take questions now or at the end.
It's up to you, Martin, and I'm happy either way. I mean, we can take questions now. Colette's got her hand up, and I see that Lorraine has. So, should we take those two?
Entirely valid.
Good morning, Martin. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate your officers for the Bristol raids going there so swiftly and responding so well. What I would also like to say, I think you've already kind of answered this, but I know, having spoken to several police officers over the last few days, they have all said to me, oh, that's the start of something that might be coming this way. Are we ready for that?
In many ways, that's an operational question, but you're quite right to be concerned. Will it come our way? It runs in phases. During my policing career, we started in the spring and say this is going to be a tough old year. There will be violence on our streets, and sometimes we're right in that, sometimes we're wrong. I mean, certainly, I think everybody would agree, it's a phrase we use, we are in unprecedented times. I'm not sure anybody saw the intensity of the violence that befell Bristol, but it's not so long ago we saw the violence that spread across the country with the shooting of, I think it was, his surname was Duggan, I can't remember his first name, and so on. And it happens from time to time. We know as a nation it happens, so we had to be prepared for it. It's something I've spoken to the Chief Constable about on numerous occasions. It's part of our strategic policing requirement. Overall, the numbers aren't quite what they used to be. If you'd have asked me 4 years ago, could we cope with a summer of violence? The Police Federation was saying no. I think the association, or not, what is it now? The MPCC was saying doubtful, but thankfully the numbers are coming back. If you don't mind, I will just defer to Rhiannon to give an answer to that. I mean, it's not quite fair to hit her with that straight away, but Rhiannon, are you happy to give a brief answer on that?
Yeah, so yeah, it is really difficult times, and we looked at this with the Black Lives Matter vigils, protests earlier on in the lockdown, and we are in a bit of a tinderbox at the moment because there are a lot of people who are extremely frustrated for all sorts of reasons, and a lot of pent-up feeling with lockdown. And we felt this with Black Lives Matter, that in some ways people wanted something to protest about, because there was that feeling in society that people did want to express their frustration with all sorts of different things. The direct question, do we think it's coming our way? Well, we work on intelligence with our communities all the time, and we share that nationally as well. So quite a lot of the time when we police protests or vigils, we're really involved with the organisers, and we're trying to work with them before any demonstration or planned protest to allow it to happen in a controlled way. And that's been particularly difficult through a pandemic, because you have to balance that responsibility to keep people safe, and then indeed with this lockdown, when the Home Secretary actually made protests unlawful within the legislation, you're balancing what you can realistically do and that feeling in Britain about people's right to express their view and have that freedom of speech. So we work very, very closely with organisers, and most of the time, right the way through the summer, that worked here in Gloucestershire, and we had very peaceful vigils in Forest of Dean, in Pittville Park, and we've had no intelligence at the moment with this Kill the Bill that sort of protest is coming our way in Gloucestershire. We did have some vigils that went very peacefully around Sarah Everard. So I can never completely guarantee. What I can say is that we plan and we practice for it, and we have a national response where we send mutual aid where it needs to go, as we did with Bristol. But our general approach here is to try and understand early, keep a watch on social media, understand what's likely to happen, and work with organisers so that we can do it in a peaceful way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just
a second question. Sorry.
I'll just top and tail that. So it's something I talked to Chief about. He's given me his assurance that we do meet our mutual aid commitments. We are well equipped. I checked that as well, and it is frequently tested. So the answer is we're as ready as we can be, and we meet all our obligations to government and other forces.
Thank you for that, Martin. And the second question was just to congratulate one of your officers. I've just gone through 7 months of harassment myself, and Detective Sarah Young, who works for you, has been absolutely excellent. So congratulations on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Rhiannon, thank you.
Lorraine.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, I couldn't find a hands up thing. It's disappeared.
Okay.
Rhiannon, sorry, morning, Martin. Rhiannon's touched on some of the things that I wanted to ask about. What I'd written down is how do we prevent the renter mobs hijacking legitimate protests? So Rhiannon's has already mentioned intelligence, and I was wondering how far we are along the route of gaining intelligence along about these renter mob persons. I don't mean they get paid. You know what I mean. It's an old-fashioned term, is renter mob, coming from the old days when we had proper riots, and I mean on a regular basis. I think it is coming our way, and it will continue to come our way as long as the extremists bring or send their persons along to, as I said, hijack legitimate protests. We don't want to be stopping legitimate protests. We're the kind of country where we have this. We are able to go out and protest, from a single person standing in the street shouting or with placards to thousands and thousands of people. I've been on some myself, I have to say, that were extremely peaceful and very, very large. But we can't be continuing to allow these people, and I think you probably all know who they are, to come and hijack it, because now what you're seeing is people who've got nothing to do with the protest standing there with their placards for this thing and that thing and the other thing, meaning absolutely nothing. It completely demeans the original protest, and I think it's dreadful. And if we can do it, we need to be able to stop them coming. So going back to what I said at the beginning, how far are we along the route of having intelligence to help us to do this?
Lorraine, it's a good question, and it's a very thoughtful question, and it will need a longer answer than I can give you here now. First of all, yes, the police are good at receiving intelligence. How they receive intelligence is a matter of interest to the Police and Crime Commissioner, because sometimes the way they've actually got that intelligence has been found to be either unlawful or disproportionate. I'm thinking about undercover officers who went into the animal rights organisations years ago. I'm not going to make a judgment on that, so they have to be very careful what they do. At the moment, the protest is unlawful in the UK. Public protest is unlawful, and that makes it very difficult for the police to try to enforce those laws. And there is no doubt in my mind that balancing the human rights, the right to protest, along with the right for the government to stop it, is a very tricky one for the police to have to do. And it's going to take a lot of very careful thinking. My role as the Police and Crime Commissioner is to talk to Chief Constable and to his officers through him to make sure they're trying to get that balance absolutely right. And it's very, very tricky for them. You know, they are yellow jackets that people see, but behind those jackets are real living people who have husbands, wives, children, daughters, all those things. They're somebody's son. They are not just a tool of government for people to throw bricks at. So thank you for your condemnation of those who do it. But this is extremely complicated, and I'm not sure how long they can actually keep the right to protest down without finding a way for people to express their views, which is absolutely essential. And I read in the papers this morning somewhere, I don't know if it's right or not, the government are going to make protest lawful as of Monday, but I only saw that in the Times this morning. I don't know if it's correct or not. But you cannot carry on another year when people legitimately cannot protest. And it can be on any topic, not just the ones that I agree with, any topic they like. And the big ones are climate change, race, and violence against women and girls. But there may be others. It's got to be proportionate and fair. And I will hold the police account to do that. And I will give them all the resources they need to do it as well. Thank you, Lorraine.
Can I just clarify something, Martin? Sorry. I wasn't particularly talking about protests during this particular time scale where groups are not allowed to congregate. This is a much wider thing than that. It's become more publicised because we're not supposed to be doing it at the moment. But once that's over, we still will have the same problem with the renter mobs, the instigators, the people who only are going out there to cause trouble.
Okay,
So
Lorraine,
that was,
the question you ask is really about intelligence gathering and everything else. What Martin's done is explain how he quizzes the Chief Constable on those matters, and he's given us that answer. I suppose the question you're asking really slips into that operational side, and that's not for us, that's for Martin. And Martin has said how he holds the Chief Constable and the Constabulary to account for those matters. I've got another hand up. I've got another hand up, which is Johnny. Johnny.
Thanks, Chair, and morning, everybody. On the note of violent, I've got two questions, Martin. So on the note of violent protest, you mentioned the shooting of Mark Duggan. Now, I remember that well because I was living in Hackney at the time. I was living in Tooting and about to move to Hackney. We'd signed a contract on the flat, and then there was a riot there before we moved in, and then we were watching things develop. And the riot spread all over London, and one of the reasons it was attributed, I think at some point, it was, this might not be completely precise, I think it was around 33 out of 38 boroughs were experiencing riots at one moment across that protest. One of the reasons it was attributed, one of the reasons it spread so well, it was attributed to the use of social media platforms, instant messengers. And that taps into a conversation that we've had previously on the panel about policing and government effort to work with social media providers, WhatsApp, Facebook, etc., and use intelligence to prevent or to kind of monitor and police in such circumstances as violent protest occurs. So I wondered if there is any recent development on that, if there's been any progress that's managed to achieve anything. This taps into a local issue, which I've raised with police lately in Cheltenham, and would massively give credit to the constabulary, who have responded really, really well. What we've seen in Cheltenham town centre on Sunday afternoons is an increase in antisocial behaviour as very large groups of children, well, young adults from the traveller communities in Gloucestershire, Herefordshire, and I think Worcestershire, kind of gather together in groups of 40, 50, 60, 70. I understand that they move from town to town at different weekends, and engage in, low-level antisocial behaviour, and they also manage to coordinate their activities using the same technology. Now, Gloucestershire has done really, really well to respond to my requests for an increased police presence, but they've had to deploy extra resource from elsewhere. And this taps into my second question, which is about police resourcing. Now, I received a piece of literature through the door lately from somebody else who's standing to be the commissioner, who thinks that they would be able to provide a further 150 police officers. Now, we welcome more police resourcing to tackle some of these issues, but the question is, how much would that cost? And given that we've just had to raise taxes because of the pressures on the budget, where could we find that money from, if not through taxation?
Wow, that's some big questions there. Right, I'll do my best, and I'll try to be fairly brief, if I may, Chair. First of all, on the social media, we all know it's a curse and a blessing. I think it's probably more of a curse than a blessing. What the constabulary have to do, and I don't want to bring them in too much, is to balance the right to privacy to open source media. They don't want to be eavesdrop on everybody who's having a party or arranging to go out for a picnic or whatever they do when they meet up. So I know the police do monitor social media. They're quite sophisticated at it, and it's open source. But I don't actually see all that intelligence. Really, that is a matter for the police to use as they think fit within the law. What I try to do is to try to give the public voice, what you've just told me about what's happening in Cheltenham, and it comes in from all the communities. And very often I meet the chief at least once a week and say, the public mood is just not right at the moment, that they are concerned about X in Cheltenham. They are worried about this over in the Forest of Dean or in the Cotswolds. And it tends to be about right. And it's that kind of blending the two together, because we want the police by consent to be proportionate, not to overreact to some social media or whoever gets the loudest voice. So I think they get it about right, but there is that right to privacy balanced with effective policing. But social media, you'll know that there's everything that happened in Bristol and at Clapham Common. The cameras were everywhere. And just imagine the pressure that puts on everybody who's there. So want to be photographed, everything they say and do is monitored. There's good and bad about that. Regarding resources, I think it's important that the constabulary is a balanced organisation. When I came to you last time to say how many we'd increase by, it's 45 next year. And I think I've got the figures here as to how many officers we'll have. I think it's 1,192. I will confirm that for the minutes by the end of the next year. That was a struggle to get to that number. I think over 70, 79, I think were paid for by local taxation. You can really cost an officer around about £50,000 with the on costs. You know, they're cheaper than that when you first get them, but of course you actually do want to retain them for 30, 40 years if you can. So it's around about 50. Now, what I've actually seen in one candidate, I think it is, I don't want to comment on who that is that there'll be 300 extra officers made available onto the beat. Well, I did put that to a former chief financial officer from another force and say what would happen. It was a very simple answer. It would break the force. I would stop you doing it as a section, whatever officer it is to do it. So £50,000 per officer. For 100 officers, you normally work on a ratio of 1 sergeant to 10 PCs, and then a ratio up to inspectors and then to chief inspectors. You know, my honest view, it's not achievable. I saw a debate between the outgoing and the prospective candidate in Wiltshire, having that very debate over 100 officers. Was it doable or not? I think it's very difficult. Now, I did have some figures here. I think they're just misplaced them. Let me just come back to this one. I had it here. Put it somewhere. Never mind. It will cost millions of pounds we don't have at the moment. The most important thing, and every commissioner or prospective candidate wants to do this differently. My policy is to grow the organisation in a balanced and proportionate way. So as we grow in numbers, we also grow with police support staff as well. The government recommends 1 to 3 to put an officer on the front line. You have 3 officers, 1 support team. You have to grow the IT, the equipment. And I think to make an offer of 300 extra officers without clearly explaining how you do that is unwise, because I think it costs about 15 million, but I'm not going to be held to that account at the moment. I just misplaced where I put those figures. About £15 million, I think it would cost, and 1% on the policing budget's around about 400,000. It's a great headline. It's just not achievable. And if for a range of reasons, we will recruit another 45 next year, brand new recruits. There'll probably be about 60 or 7 will leave. That will be the full capacity of our training centre at the Sabrina Centre, because we're also training PCSOs and specials and other people there. So that would be almost impossible to do in the short term, just to maintain where we are. The same, we have to recruit specials. We need more of those. We've got the optimum number now. We have to maintain the optimum number in the future. And we're working on that to make sure it's absolutely optimum. Probably the best way to release officers to the front line is now improving our technology. The answer to the 101 situation, which is improving but not there yet, is better technology. Probably the long-term solution to our crime data integrity issues, which we've had in the past, and this panel has been very vocal on, is actually improved technology. Probably the way to get officers on the beat is actually some artificial intelligence where people aren't involved. That's the way to do that. Now, I'm not going to ask Rhiannon and Craig to come in. They're probably itching to do so, but it's not fair on them. That's the way to do it. In my election campaign, I will not be offering 300 extra officers because I don't think it's achievable. I think it's disingenuous to suggest it, and I think it would be a mistake. You grow your organisation by growing it proportionately, so much to the back office, what do you want to call it, so much to the vehicles, so much to the IT, so much to the officers. And I don't know anybody who thinks that's a smart way to go. I will come back to the numbers if I can work out where I put them.
I can't see any hands up, and we stopped you partway through your report. So
yeah,
would you like to carry on, Martin?
Yes, I would, if I just need to find my place now. Okay, thank you very much. Let's move on to the Safer Streets Fund. As you'll know, that because of the outrage around what happened at Clapham Common and violence against women and girls, the government doubled the amount of money available for these Safer Street funds, which you'll be pleased to know that this year we absolutely will be applying for. Let me just deal with some of the residual issues, because we had a long debate over this at a panel, I think 2 or 3 meetings ago, and some people haven't heard the message. I'm not saying there's people on this panel, they haven't. Now, let me just set out the reason we didn't apply last year, roughly about a year ago today. Today is when COVID lockdown began. It was the assessment of my office, the police and others, that the likelihood of success applying last year was absolutely limited. That was from the data that we received. The work necessary to work up a bid, we decided was disproportionate to the chances of actually being successful. And that was a view taken by many commissioners across the country of all parties, close neighbours in Wiltshire, Warwickshire, further away in Essex. So many commissioners came to that decision. At that particular time, the force was facing the biggest health emergency in my living memory and your living memory. We had discussions about what we should be doing and where we should be focusing our resource. It was a strategic decision that I would allow the force to prepare for COVID-19. And at that time, the projections of what was going to happen was actually worse, far worse than the first wave. So the attention was diverted there. It was a strategic, well-considered decision that it was not appropriate to divert attention and time to a bid that we thought we would be unlikely to receive money for. I take full responsibility for that decision. I know it's being used politically against me now. It was the right decision. It was this decision shared by many, many PCCs across the country. I'm going to move on to the full report in a minute, Chair, so don't worry, I will stop fairly soon. Actually, with the benefit of hindsight or foresight, that decision has been proven to be correct. Those who did receive the money, many of them are in great difficulty now in actually spending that money because of wave 2. It would have involved accessing people's homes, and we all know that wave 2 was worse than wave 1. So I stand by that decision. It was the right decision, and that people can say what they like. It's been used for political gain. I am the only PCC in the country who's been criticised for my decision, and because I'm the independent, I know that. So let's move on to the next bid. The criteria has changed this year. It allows local authorities to bid and being supported by their police and crime commissioner. We're now considering 3 bids, 1 in Cheltenham, 2 in Gloucester. They're good bids, which I've seen, the outline of them, and they are focusing very much on the areas of hopefully, it's Westgate in Gloucester, the park in Gloucester, and the area around the hospital, the Bath Road in Cheltenham, those particular areas. Those are the areas we think, looking at the data, where we have the greatest chance of success. And I think this time we have a very good chance of success. The criteria has changed now to include business premises, and the data has changed somewhat. And the actual deadline for submitting it has also got a lot easier. We're not facing wave 1 or wave 2 now, hopefully not facing wave 3. So there's very good work there. There's good work going on in Cheltenham by the Community Safety Partnership, and the same in Gloucester. My team expect to receive those applications today or tomorrow. If it doesn't come by tomorrow, it'll be too late. So please make sure they get those in quickly. And we also are trying to make sure that they do deal with the issue of violence against women and girls. It wasn't the criteria that was in this bid or the previous bid, but the Home Office made it fairly clear that they would like to see an emphasis towards violence against women and girls, even though it's not part of the criteria. And there may be a 3rd round. So I just wanted to update you on that particular Safer Streets bids. Does anybody want to ask any questions on that? Because I know it's a great interest to some people in particular.
Karen, I can see your hand.
Martin, I'm just going to ask a Stroud question. You talked about bids in Cheltenham and Gloucester, and it may well be that it's out of the profile, but I think as a Stroud representative, if you could tell me why there's no work being considered in Stroud.
Thank you, Karen. It's a very fair question. We receive the very crude data from the Home Office. That's not being rude to the Home Office. They say it's very, very crude data of areas that may or may not be eligible to apply. And then we overlay that with local crime data and local intelligence. And there were 3 areas which really stood out across the county that had the best chance of success. And Stroud wasn't really in there. Now, I think Ruth may be able to clarify this for me, that we did approach all those areas to say this is the potential. And then it is the responsibility of the local authorities to decide whether or not they are prepared to support a bid looking at the data. I mean, we all know there are dozens of areas which are potentially thrown up to begin with to say you could bid, you could bid, you could bid. But then you have to look at the chance of success and the amount of work to work those up. Ruth, can you help us with that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we identified a number of areas, and Stroud Central actually did come out as a potential. They could have put in a bid only marginally above, but slightly above the benchmark criteria, eligibility criteria that the Home Office have outlined in their prospectus. So we, as an office, our role is obviously to gather we gather the Home Office information. We ask the force to use their data to update that and identify those areas that are more likely to get the funding and reach the criteria. And then we try and work with the CSPs, and we've shared every piece of information that we've had along the way with the CSPs as we've gone, and that includes Stroud. We you know, and the offer of support to help them put the bid in. But as Martin said, at the moment we are looking like we're getting bids from Cheltenham and Gloucester only.
That's really helpful. Perhaps a little disappointing in terms of Stroud District, but that ship sailed now. But if the closing date's tomorrow.
Well, Karen, there is some good news. We anticipate there may be around 3, and you know I don't want to put any criticism on any district council. It would be unfair. These are complicated bids. But can I just come back to the question from Johnny? I had the paper turned over the wrong way. To increase by 150 officers would require an additional £13 million on the policing budget, which equates to a 21% increase in council tax. Of course, that's over and above the percentage that would be necessary to cover inflation and other mandated costs. You will know that the 4.99 just basically covered what we needed to do. So that's how it would be. What I've read is a promise for 300 extra. So let me just help you. I just found the baseline figures. I anticipate, and that's what I presented to the Police and Crime panel just last time. Our establishment at the moment is 1,110, and we anticipate at the end of this financial year being at 1,196 full-time equivalent officers. You know, I think that is a very helpful growth of the organisation. I think it's probably all we can manage at the moment, and I'm not being negative here. You have to grow things gently, carefully, so you don't go off in one direction or the other. We also have 116 PCSOs. Those who've been on the panel from the beginning, people like Martin, remember I made an absolute commitment to keep PCSOs. I think they're important. I think the community like them, and we kept that commitment. And we actually have 838 staff. That's the projection by the end of this year. And the police staff are very, very important. So that's important as well, because these are the people who keep our IT systems running, our intelligence systems running. They're people in the control room, they're people in the cells. These are really important people. And you don't have a warranted officer with all the additional costs that they come with to do jobs you don't need a warrant for. But it's better than that. We currently have 111 special constables. We have a budgeted plan to recruit more during the next forthcoming year. I think there's a cohort of 12 already arranged for June, another cohort of 12 for December. And had a lot of work on this. The plan is to make sure that we maintain around about 10% of our workforce are special constables, because that is what has been recommended by the Association, the Special Constables and the National Police Chiefs Council, to keep it in proportion with the regular force. If you grow too much more than that, you tend to get, it becomes a bit unwieldy. And just by reducing a few back this year, we've maintained the same number of hours and the productivity at a lower cost. I say lower cost because we equip our special constables with all the right body-worn video, the vehicles, all the tactics we give to the main officers, maybe not quite all of them, but the vast majority. So that's nicely in proportion too. What you'll see from me is we will grow the organisation carefully, we'll nurture it, it will get bigger, but it will be grown in a sensible way without headlines.
Okay, thanks, Martin. I can't see any other hands up on the issue that was raised.
Okay.
Yeah. David.
Yeah, just again on the issue of which councils were approached. Is it the case that all the councils were approached to ask them if they wished to bid for the Safer Streets funding with the Home Office data, or was it you were expected them proactively to come to you?
I think it's what I'll ask Ruth on the detail of that one. I think you're probably referring to the area where you represent Tewkesbury. We are limited to a maximum of 3 bids. So that's the first thing. So not all 6 areas will be eligible. So that's the first criteria. I'll ask Ruth. I think Tewkesbury is a particular low crime area and didn't quite come there, did it, Ruth?
Yeah, so the Home Office categorised, you've got your neighbourhood crimes, and they're primarily looking at your acquisitive crimes. So burglary, robbery of personal property, I should say residential burglary, robbery of personal property, theft of, theft from vehicle, and theft from the person. And you have to look at that at the lower super output area. So it's very defined areas. And the Home Office will provide you with the information, a starter for 10 using police.co.uk data, and they ask the forces to then do further work with more precise and current data to understand what the baselines, to see whether or not you hit their baselines for rates of crimes in those areas. And when we did that piece of work within the constabulary, we commissioned that piece of work through to the performance team, so our experts in analytical team in the constabulary, to use the resources they have to pull that together. We found that actually there weren't any other areas that met the criteria that would have put a strong bid in. Tewkesbury, it's great to say they didn't come up, neither did the Forest. And the Cotswolds, we felt as well was not. When you looked at the opportunity for 3 bids, we had to say, okay, these are the ones that we feel are more likely based on the data. But I will say though that when we
3 bids across the county, so we were sort of we had a budget, if you like, of we can make 3 bids. So it was only a question of allocating where you prioritise those 3 bids, which was based on analysing the data across the county, and that's why you came up with the 1 Cheltenham, 2 Gloucester.
Yeah. So and Stroud, as I said, as well, came out there as well. So but the what we did do is the OPCC attended the Home Office briefing, and any information we got at any point along the process we shared with all partners. And then when it came to identifying those areas that were reaching the criteria, the eligibility criteria, then we obviously engaged more proactively with them.
Okay, I've got a hand up from Lorraine. Lorraine?
I'm coming. Sorry, I do apologise. I have to keep my video switched off, otherwise you will do odd things. This is just a very quick one. Do these financial scams that are going on all over the place at the minute, does that come under acquisitive crime or is that fraud? That's just for me.
So it would come under acquisitive crime, but not in the eligibility criteria that the Home Office has determined. They, as I said, they talk about these neighbourhood crime, a bundle of crimes, but you have those are your primary considerations. But what you can then do is look at secondary considerations, and that can be anything from antisocial behaviour, violence against women and girls. It can be anything you want. But what they're really looking for and what they're really going to mark you on is that neighbourhood, those acquisitive crimes there.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks for that. Just before we move on from this particular item and the safer streets, and I think the safer streets is very welcome, but listening into the beginning of the council meeting in Cheltenham yesterday, I think the view there was that this is much more than trying to sort out just the safer streets money, and this needs a nationwide approach to rid ourselves of the sort of misogyny that we see and the way in which women are so badly affected, often in terms of violence. And it's about, educating young children as they go into their teenage years as to what proper relationships are. So it's an education thing. It's about youth workers, where they are, that they can start these conversations, because in the end, women have to feel safe. And at the moment, they don't. And it really doesn't matter whether it's a high crime area or not. If you don't feel safe, you don't feel safe. And that has to stop. And I think some constabularies have already taken the view that misogyny should be treated as a hate crime. And I believe that that's going to be rolled out much more widely. I do think it's an area that we will, or the panel will need to look at going into the future. And it is something that actually needs a whole Gloucestershire response, quite apart from a whole nationwide response. So I think being able to talk to the county council, districts, health authority, and anyone in the county responsible is something we need to move to. We've looked at a child-friendly Gloucestershire, and I think that kind of approach is needed if we're going to change the way in which society looks upon gender. And so, do you have any more, Martin, on your report? You seem to be muted, Martin. I don't know why.
Well, yeah, Chair, you know, I absolutely agree with that. I was interviewed by, I think, the Times and the Independent about this very issue. And I was very clear, along with my other vice chairs and chairs of the association, that misogyny should become a hate crime. I agree with you on that. I think the government will legislate for it, which I absolutely welcome. And I'm also glad to report that Safer Gloucestershire, which my deputy chairs, commissioned a piece of work and research around violence against women and girls, which is very shortly to report. So it's a very good starting point. And just to finish off on David's point around safer streets, just to point out again, I am the only commissioner in the country who has this political issue over it. Labour and Tory didn't apply for exactly the same circumstances as I did. I get a bit tired of it because actually it raises the fear of crime, which I think is unforgivable in many ways. But so we move on to a new phase, as far as I'm concerned anyway. I stand by my original decision. It's just so disappointing that people misrepresent me, but there we go. It's part of life, I suppose. But I'm going to go on very quickly and stop me if you want. Very quickly,
I think if you can try and finish your report quite quickly, that would be helpful, Martin. But I don't.
It would be.
If there's important things to say, there are important things to say.
It kind of depends how many questions actually.
Yeah. Okay.
First of all, COVID. Over 500 officers have now been vaccinated through the excess vaccine scheme, which was negotiated by the police. A big thank you to the two ACCs on the line for making it happen, and to my team who made it happen. Over 500 now. Vaccine that would have gone to waste otherwise. That's great news. On the police and the COVID, I also want to say that I'm impressed with the way the police have actually responded to very, very difficult change in regulations. They haven't got it right all the time. When they got it wrong, they've been magnanimous and accepted it. So I wish them well and thank them for it. On complaints against police, I think that's important. Just to report, I do meet with the Independent Commission for Complaints against IOPC, Independent Office of Police Complaints, on a very regular basis. They report to me they are content with the performance of the force, and also they have no major concerns. They're also delighted at the new posts I have in my office, a chap called Kevin McCluskey. He reviews all the appeals, and we actually uphold more complaints than we used to. Of course, that costs money and increases the budget of the OPCC, but that's a mandatory post which is imposed upon us by government, one I welcome. That's the important thing. There's been some talk panel members may have heard of that Gloucestershire receives more complaints than some other forces. There is no comparable data available to make that assumption. It's just not there, and the Office of Independent Office of Police Complaints confirmed that to me. Gloucestershire, when they receive a complaint from one person, they may say there is one complaint of abusive behaviour, one complaint of violence, and one complaint of something else. They will record that as 3 complaints or 5 complaints, however many there are in there from one person. And neighbouring force may actually decide to record it as 1. So I had it confirmed by the Office of Police Conduct to say there is no comparable data. So when you have heard that Gloucestershire has a disproportionate amount of complaints per officer, you can disregard it. It has no basis in fact. Not fair on the police to make out that they're a bad lot when they're not.
Okay, I've got, it looks as if there's two hands up. I've got Chris Bryan and Karen. I don't know, Karen, did you have your hand up before? This is a new one. Yeah. So I'll take, Karen, do you want to go first?
I guess I want to just take an issue with your comments about complaints. I had to make a complaint back in December, and I have to say I was quite interested in the way that it was investigated in terms of the internal independence of that. And I suppose I was told that it wasn't unusual to have line managers investigating complaints, which is unusual in other organisations, and if that's what happens in the police, you know, I think there's probably so. But the other thing that I would like to know is how you work with learning from complaints. So in some respects, the fact that you have a lot of complaints is a statistical process. It's about the quality of those complaints and how that actually changes practice. And that other issue about sort of challenging independence. So having someone who's standing outside the direct line management of police to actually look at a piece of practice and say, was this okay? Because that's what happens in other local authorities where it's taken offline.
Well, I could say I've made a complaint about the county council. It wasn't dealt with that way. It was dealt with totally internally. I wasn't very happy with it. That was a while ago. I made complaints against the police. I was moderately happy about that, not particularly. Line managers do investigate complaints. If you take something back to Mark Spencer's, you go to a supervisor and they try to deal with it. If they can't, they get escalated up. It often goes on to an ombudsman. It's a huge topic. If you want me to go quickly, I need to refer that back to a written answer or to come back to another panel. But there's no short answer to that. And I agree with the sympathy of what you say, Karen, but I can't answer that one quickly.
Okay. I mean, I don't think it's that a complicated question. If I was responding on a different level, but
okay. Well, maybe it's not a complicated answer, but it's a lengthy one to give it justice. And I'm happy to have a conversation with you outside the meeting. But Collins wanted me to go quickly, and that's a 5 to 10 minute answer to do it justice.
It may be that it should be a topic. I think it would be a good topic for a new panel to look at, is how complaints are looked at. I think it's an important question in terms of what's the learning from the complaints. You know, even if the complaint isn't upheld, there's often minor points that could have been handled better. I can just see Richard with his hand up. Richard?
Yes, I could just add to this conversation. I think you're right. When the panel reforms in July, we have our own independent review officer in the OPCC team. And I think it'd be quite good for him to come along and explain in a bit more detail how the complaints process work, both from the professional standards department side of things and our role in creating an independent approach to certain elements of the police complaints procedure.
Yeah, Richard is absolutely right. And it's additional cost to the OPCC. The person who does it for us is very professional. We uphold far more complaints. And we are independent of the police. We genuinely are. And the two chief officers here will know that's the case. Very challenging on these issues. But the point I wanted to make, I read in, I think, a local paper or somewhere, that Gloucestershire Police has a disproportionate amount of complaints compared to other forces. There is no comparable data to draw that conclusion, because Gloucestershire may record 5 complaints from one person to say this happened, that happened, and neighbouring force may just count it as one person, one complaint. So we have to be fair to the police to represent them properly, and they have to represent us well as well. That's the point I wanted to make, Chair. Moving on, I'm going to cut some of these out now.
Sorry, I've just got Chris Bryan who had his hand up.
Sorry, Chris.
No, Chair, you carry on. Don't want to prolong the meeting any longer. We need to get into other parts of the meeting, don't we? So,
okay. I'm really quick. I'm just going to give you headlines now then. I was going to talk about the focus on dog thefts in the county and the progress being made there. I won't go into what I was going to say unless people would like to ask me about that. So that's the first thing. Secondly, I want to mention the Police and Crime Commission review that was announced by the Home Office. You will have been cited on what's in it. I think it's a good, fair review. I was part of that review panel. I think it's sensible, and I welcome it, particularly a bit about publishing data, so there is clear data for the public to see, rather than speculative data, which isn't available for the public to see always. I think that'd be really helpful. And there's much more in there which will be useful in part 1 and part 2 of that review. But I won't go into any detail because we're busy and we want to move on to the next part of the meeting, so do I.
I can't see any hands up on this, so I think we'll move on.
Okay, into headlines then. You'll have noticed those, well, it wasn't in the press actually. We began the rebuild of the Bank Furlong Motor Patrol Specialist Centre on Monday. I think we started knocking down part of the old site that'll be rebuilt. The original cost was 23.5 million, give or take a few hundred thousand. We got it down, I think, now to just over 11. That's because a very ecological way of doing it. It's much more green to refurbish old buildings that we found out for the Sabrina Centre. So we had a complete redesign, which I will take a lot of credit for because they were very tense, tough decisions and discussions with the chief. Credit to him too. Working with the builders, we got £10 million off that build. It will be fantastic. It's going to coincide with the refurb of that junction as well. You know, is it for the police? Yes, it is for the police. They deserve quality operation basis to work out of. They work hard. Why wouldn't we give them the best we possibly can afford? But more importantly, it will provide a fantastic service for next generation of people, particularly around Cheltenham and Gloucester, a home for our specialist teams to serve the people of Gloucestershire. So that was a manifesto commitment made in 2016, and it's okay, 5 years later, the build is underway. It'll be open, I think, in May, June next year, all being well. Very quickly again, another commitment was that, this wasn't a commitment. Lidley Police Station reopened just about 12 months ago. It's grown in size and stature. Rhiannon may cover that. And I'm delighted there's now a reception there, which is what the public want to see. It's a trial period at the moment, so if the public use it, it will stay, I guess, and that's fantastic. And they're putting a reception back into Barton Street, which I think is fantastic, something I've been going on about with the chief for a long, long time. So that's 2 bits of really good news coming back from the years of austerity. That's fantastic. I'm just going to finish on the burglary rates, etc., etc. It's great news that Gloucestershire, which one of the forces, will trial the ankle tags for people released from prison for burglary. I think that's a good thing, provided it's actually part of their sentence, provided it's part of their rehabilitation, and provided it probably won't happen, it's monitored by the probation service rather than some private company. So if it actually is combined with rehabilitation, rebuilding their lives, I actually welcome that, and we'll be monitoring that very carefully to see how that impacts on our burglary levels, which historically have been quite difficult in this county. So I've run through the last little bit. Of course, I'll take questions, but we do need to leave time for the 2 important presentations from Rhiannon and the others.
Okay, I can't see any hands up, so if we move on, so Rhiannon, if you can tell us about the remodelling, that'd be great.
Okay, thank you. Andrea, are you going to share my slides? Is that okay?
No, Ruth is sharing them for you, Rhiannon.
Gonna do it? That's absolutely fine. Thanks, Ruth. So thank you for the opportunity to come and speak to you this morning. I've been in Gloucestershire now since the end of April, having transferred over from Gwent Constabulary. I've only been here during a pandemic, so it's good to meet you all, even if virtually, and I haven't actually shaken anyone's hand in the entire time I've been here, which is quite strange really when I'm coming up to a year. My portfolio includes local policing, public contact, which includes the force control room and all the reception areas, and single online home and other ways of accessing the police, but also professional standards. So I'm really happy to feed into any future presentation that you want about professional standards. But just to give some reassurance on the questions that are asked, broadly speaking, we do try and learn the lessons. So we do have complaints data shared with us about any trends. What are the main things that are coming up about dissatisfaction or complaints? And there's a meeting that looks at that, whether that's a learning and development issue or whether it's something that we need to put in bulletins. And so we do that on an ongoing basis. And If they're misconduct allegations, they are investigated by our professional standards department, which therefore isn't in line management of the officers concerned. And indeed, if they're really serious, the Independent Office of Police Complaints often has that independent oversight of investigations that we do. So I just thought I'd cover that really briefly for some reassurance with the issues that were raised there. Next slide, Ruth, please. So why did we need to change the operating model? Well, I was going through the same in Gwent back in 2015, and lots of organisations were. Austerity hit the police service hard, and essentially there was that need to centralise in order to try and cut numbers and really cut ourselves down to that core policing role. And they were really difficult times, and really difficult in terms of staff welfare, difficult in terms of fulfilling the Police and Crime Commissioner priorities. It was difficult, and a lot of constabularies really suffered with their neighbourhood policing and that commitment to communities at that time. We have always preferred a localised model, and so it was really pleasing as I joined the organisation then that we were at that time with some of the officer uplift that we could look to move back to a more localised model. If you can go on to the next slide, Ruth, please. And that is because neighbourhood policing begins and ends in a neighbourhood. And this new revised operating model is really about that localised service delivery. Trying to devolve leadership, you'll see when we go on that we've put senior officers out into the local policing areas so that there is that sense of one team and that sense of ownership of crimes and incidents from beginning to end. And then you'll see in the Chief Constable's comments there that very much on his agenda was the supportive leadership and wellbeing programme. So coming out of that period of austerity, trying to make officers and staff more responsible for their local areas, we need to therefore support our leaders and make sure that all our staff were looking after their wellbeing. And there is a big focus now on standards matter, on pride, professionalism, what's expected by people owning investigations from beginning to end. Okay. So the senior leadership team, I'm really pleased to say that I'm supported by 3 great superintendents out in the local areas. I don't know whether you'll have seen them at the Police and Crime Panel meetings, but all of them have a wealth of experience. We have Emma Davis in Cheltenham and Tewkesbury, Kath Davis in Stroud and the Cotswolds, and Jane Probert in the Forest and Gloucester. And then they're supported by their chief inspectors, Roddy Gosden, Ian Fletcher and Rich Pegler. And that gives us that really clear team and ownership at that local area. And now they have shift inspectors for those still answering the calls and doing the investigations. That was an investment, considerable investment. They have a detective inspector on each area to keep an eye on the more serious crimes and trends, and they have neighbourhood inspectors. Those neighbourhood inspectors haven't changed. So the neighbourhood policing model of the structure hasn't changed, and those are absolutely key. There is also a community harm reduction team, which brings in many of the issues that were discussed today. So this is where we can really focus on that early intervention and prevention work that we do very well here in Gloucestershire. There's a huge amount of partnership work, and the Aston project has just got High Sheriff Awards for what they do with children on the brink of crime and trying to turn them away and divert them from crime. And this is where, with our school beat officers, that education, that focus on education you were talking about, Chair, about people's attitudes and trying to shape those attitudes towards relationships, and is so important. And so that community harm reduction team is still central, but school beat and other things that are going out into the communities, into the local areas as well. Thanks, Ruth. Sorry, stop jumping around. So as I've mentioned, those are the broad areas of responsibility. And actually, this is something that Gloucestershire had previously. So sometimes it is good to go back to what was there before because people are familiar with that. And it aligns to the local authority boundaries as well. Okay. So what are the responsibilities of the neighbourhood team? Well, this is absolutely crucial if you're going to build that consent within the communities, if you're going to get that intelligence about where there are frustrations, where there are difficulties. If you're going to have that trust and confidence in the police service, then people need proper relationships that they can build with people that they see in their neighbourhood all the time, who they can feel can invest and care. So the PCSOs have a massive part to play in this. And it's that prevention and crime and harm through consistent problem solving. The antisocial behaviour issues that can grind down a community don't get solved by police swooping in and making some arrests. They get solved by us working together with partners and with members of the community about what's at the root cause of those problems and what can we do together to divert young people, give them something to do, and really get to the root cause. It also allows us to target our resources and our response to those most vulnerable. And a lot of that is so crucial because and so aligned to the police and crime plan. A lot of elderly people, the root cause of problems is often loneliness, you know, and we need to be able to work with communities and have that strong neighbourhood response to be able to go out, talk about what we're doing and why, and make sure that communities understand and that we're listening to them as well. Okay, Ruth? And then the local policing team, so they are the ones that you will see driving about with blue lights on, responding to things quickly, but crucially now also undertaking those initial investigations. And I think that's really important because I think when officers arrive with that immediate threat of harm and risk that they need to deal with and mitigate, they are also looking those victims in the eye. And for the vast majority of crime, saying, I'm going to be your officer in the case and I'm going to keep looking at this for you right through to the end. Clearly, there are some investigations that go to our specialist teams and that doesn't change. But also now, rather than being one central team, these officers are also locally based, so they will get used to patrolling on their patch, working with the neighbourhood teams. I can't begin to describe to you how much better already the communication is between the teams. So they're working together and having that sense of ownership and investment in a local area, which I think is absolutely crucial. Next slide. And this operating model allows us to look, and it cuts across all of the police crime priorities. So I mentioned about older people, older but not overlooked, the community harm reduction, school beat, the neighbourhood policing officers allow us to really invest in young children becoming adults. There's a huge amount of work that goes in with our specialist teams, but also a lot of the specials as well, and parish councillors around community speed watch with safe and social roads. So there's a huge amount, and we will have a nighttime economy again at some point soon, and it's really important that those safe days and nights teams are there and visible in the community. So there's a huge amount with the police and crime plan, and also for me, the every contact counts and every crime matters is rooted in this more localised model so that there's ownership right the way through. One of the things from the Black Lives Matter protests that happened, we stay on this slide, Ruth. One of the things from the Black Lives Matter was the feeling that we needed to strengthen how we listened to members of the Black and minority ethnic communities. And so we have set up a community legitimacy panel where, you know, it's a really, really active panel, and it gives It gives people the ability to scrutinise whether we're using our powers fairly, to help us with trying to make our workforce more representative, and listening to them about how we can engage more in the communities. And that is built up from the bedrock of neighbourhood policing. So when, after George Floyd, we had quite a contentious arrest in areas of Barton Street, we were able to be transparent with that panel about, you know, why the police did what they did, learn about where we had a shortfall in terms of our press releases and communications, and work with that panel, which I think is how we build that trust and how we keep those relationships going, and therefore are able to balance the rights of protest, vigils, and try and work with our communities and local organisations to make those things work in Gloucestershire. And I was really proud. Craig will go on about COVID and how we policed, but I was really proud of how we could work together, and actually those vigils could take place in Gloucestershire without any need for many of our specialist tactics. Really, we did it in a very neighbourhood policing driven way. Okay, so one of the big links is with the work of Safer Gloucestershire, and as the Police and Crime Commissioner alluded to, it's the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner that chairs Safer Gloucestershire, and we are really linked in. So ACES links in with Safer Gloucestershire and with the Health and Wellbeing Board. Nearly everybody has adverse child experiences, but the work with ACES really allows us, for our police officers and staff, to be trauma informed. So instead of what's wrong with you, to people sometimes offending, it's what's happened to you that's making you behave in this way, and how can we help? Sometimes people just need a trusted adult or a role model, or something permanent that they can cling on to. And having ACES does not mean inevitably that you go down a life of crime, but we need to understand. We do a lot with Prevent now. So Prevent gets a bad press in a lot of areas of the country, but actually our Prevent mechanisms are really strong with counter-terrorism. And more recently as well, under the banner of Safer Gloucestershire, we had a serious organised crime symposium, and that was about raising awareness with our key partners about identifying those who are at risk of being drawn into serious organised crime, often because they've had ACEs, often because they're vulnerable, often because they feel excluded from their communities. So there's a lot with Safer Gloucestershire that embeds our work with the Police and Crime Plan and also with our partners. So we look at, in Safer Gloucestershire, locality-based crime. There's work streams on social isolation, which is such a big thing, particularly through and coming out of the pandemic. As the Police and Crime Commissioner mentioned, there has been work with violence and against women and girls, and all of the domestic abuse case reviews go back to Safer Gloucestershire for that multi-agency learning. There is lots of work around the safeguarding children agenda, substance and alcohol misuse, and vulnerability and exploitation. So a huge amount of our work is channeled into Safer Gloucestershire, and then of course the community safety partnerships in each of the local areas. So I do feel that this revised operating model is allowing us to be more embedded within each community. And if I just go to the last couple of slides. So we are seeing the benefits already. We are seeing the benefits of that policing at a local level, having that senior and accountable leadership. So there are places for MPs to clock into, councillors, for you to have that superintendent and chief inspector who's your local superintendent and chief inspector. Stuff shouldn't be coming across our desk at exec level if people haven't had the chance to sort it out locally first, and that is happening more and more. And they therefore are able to engage with key local stakeholders early on. And some things we want to introduce pan Gloucestershire, but some things don't work like that. Quite often it can be done very differently in Stroud than it can in Cheltenham, for example. And so it's having that ability to be more flexible. And then it's really important then that it's not us and them within the constabulary. We have really, really close links with all of the specialist resources. And those relationships are developing all the time as well. Interestingly, with staff workload and well-being, that has been improving, and even through the pandemic, in our staff surveys that have been done locally and nationally, we have our issues, because of course we do. It's been a really difficult time for all of us and policing working through the pandemic. But actually, when you look at our well-being results, we are doing better than our peers in Gloucestershire. The supportive and wellbeing programme is well embedded. I am really keen to improve through this operating model our investigative excellence and include not only the speed at which we carry out investigations, but also very much about how we update victims of crime and make sure that that happens all the time. We have work to do there. But essentially, I feel that the improvements that we've made and that investment in senior leadership roles and aligning people to local areas is paying dividends already, and people have that sense of belonging with their communities, which I think is absolutely vital. Thank you very much. Happy to take any questions. And I will hand back to the PCC. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rhiannon. And it's a very well presented synopsis. You know, it's been a long journey. I'm glad you started right back in the depths of austerity. Look, I'll take as many questions as you like. From my point of view, this is the last policing crime panel before an election. This was the thrust of my 2016 campaign. It was a manifesto commitment. We would bring back neighbourhood policing. I needed that mandate because I had to get the full backing of the force, and I thank them for giving me their full backing and giving you their full backing on that. You've now heard how the police have responded to that challenge. There's more challenges to come. That's all done at a time when you'll hear later they've improved their position in comparison to other police forces in the country. So that's a big tick for them as well. It's also at a time when we've allocated 1% of the policing budget to community projects and programmes, which will help keep Gloucestershire safer, through Safer Gloucestershire, through other areas. All the areas will have benefited from that. It's going to be really important going forward with the violence against women and girls agenda to really be linked into the grassroots of our community. There's dozens and dozens of organisations we support, and I will continue with that if I remain as Commissioner. It's a time when the force has improved its IT. It's a tough challenge, that one, but it has improved its IT. It's a time when we've improved our training. You've heard about the Sabrina Centre. It's a time when we've actually improved our estate. You know, we've just begun Bang Furlongs, a big overdue project. We've improved our estate at Cheltenham by refurbishing that building, getting rid of the old building, building a new one, or refurbish a new one. Same at Gloucester, same at the Forest of Dean. We built a new cell complex. Many of you will have come to the opening of that. That was a dangerous area for policing. Our cells in Gloucester were really so substandard, so well done for that. We've got a new investigative centre at Prison House, and we got a great new storage centre as well, which is crucial to move all those buildings around. So after 5 years, I think we did okay, and I think I did okay. Others will no doubt disagree and look for the worst. But actually, I do agree with HMIC that this is a good force. So I want to thank Rhiannon and her team, the Chief Constable, but they're not a perfect force. So from time to time, there'll be areas for improvement. And of course they are, and this panel will know what they are, and so will I. Well, I'd rather look at the good. This is a good county, it's a good force. Thank you. Any questions?
I've got a hand up from Johnny and Karen at the moment. So, Johnny.
Thanks, Jeff. Big fan of the operating model. The logic behind it is spot on, and I'm confident that it'll resonate very well with the people I represent. Just wanted to know about performance data, review periods, if you could shed any light on that.
Okay, that will come in the next presentation, Johnny. So if you could just hold that question until the next presentation, because performance data is important. It's a complex issue, but that is the next presentation.
Okay, Karen?
Yeah, it was really helpful, and obviously having police walking beside communities is a really effective way of working. I'm just slightly concerned about, and it's probably not part of the presentation rather than missing, I'm absolutely sure, about some of those specialist services, about how you manage risk. Those, I'm thinking things like MAPA, and probably from my professional background, safeguarding. Particularly as things like county lines have become become much more aware of them during lockdown. And the one wonderful thing about delegating responsibility to localities is that people get to know their localities, but you sometimes lose the expertise, and that's particularly somewhere like Gloucestershire, where safeguarding is beginning to show some green shoots, but it's still at an early stage. How can I be reassured that the expertise is there, as well as the ability to work to local level?
Do you want me to answer that, Martin?
If you would, it's all a question of balance. Rhiannon and Craig are much better qualified to do that, but it is always that question of balance, that people want to see the police physically on foot, if preferable, if they can, but also that balance, as you say, of risk management. Rhiannon, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so the Public Protection Unit, which has the MAPA and the sex offender officers, that's still central. So even though some of the sex offender officers are based locally, which has big advantages as well, they are still managed centrally. So all of the safeguarding, that is all still central, and those specialist services. So that's why my presentation was very much about what has been devolved locally, which is the local policing and the initial response and investigation.
So presumably in terms of training those staff, so that at the first point of contact, they would recognise something like a county lines issue and know what to do with it.
Absolutely, Karen. County lines is a perennial issue. It's a big issue for government at the moment. I frequently talk to government about this, because obviously what starts in London will come to Gloucestershire, and Gloucestershire will end up going into the West Midlands. It's something I know that they are always on to make sure they have the enforcement wing of it. So that's the easy bit, shall we say. It's not easy, but that's the obvious bit. The more complex bit, which I think you're talking about, is why are these young children involved in county lines in the first place, and why are they spreading so much damage around communities? I think this is a really big issue. It's what we try to divert a lot of the funds from the Commissioner's Fund to try to divert people away from criminality. We need other people to come on board. It's probably, well, it is what motivates me to be the Commissioner. It's not the police bit I find interesting, and crime is a really crucial bit to get that balance right. And I think you're right about county lines. I think, once we focus on that, we must start to focus more on violence against women and girls, because that needs to change, within the police service, but everywhere else as well. Our funding for sexual ISVAs, it's only on a 2-year basis for the Ministry of Justice. All PCCs of all colours are saying, please, can we have this into the mainstream budgets so we can really start to plan this long-term piece of work? The court system is very hard for people who are vulnerable to go through it. I'm not making any political points here. Everybody agrees on this. So, Karen, you're absolutely on the right page, and I thank you for your comments. And it will always be a priority. It always will be.
Okay, thank you. I can't see any other hands up. Make yourself known if you do have a question. And if not, I want to say thank you to Rhiannon for giving us that presentation. And I thought it was really helpful. And I think in terms of, I think particularly about county lines, having that link, such a strong link in communities, actually helps with information flow. So long as you do have specialist services centrally that can pick up on that, because as being said, crime starts and finishes in the locality, and so I think absolutely you're going in the right direction. And I'm just curious to know how many other forces are doing similar things is, you know, because I mean, sadly I do go back a bit.
We all do.
Yeah.
I think,
and you know, I remember when I was first chair of the police committee, it was that idea of getting police officers out of panda cars and back onto the street. So there's nothing new, but I just wondered if there is a general move in that direction across the country.
Colin, if I can just help you, Rhiannon obviously can comment. Generally, what actually helped was an election, and I'm not electioneering here. There was some conflict between me and the previous chief constable. There was always respect, but you know, quite rightly, when we saw the budget cuts that we had around between 2010 and 15, they were so dreadful, and it really looked like it was going to get worse. That was the prediction for HMIC. So there was that centralisation of resources. It took the police to a place that they were very uncomfortable with. You'd all heard that they said this. You know, they don't have the resources now to do what the public should reasonably expect. And this current government saw that as well. That's why they began to reverse them. So, and when I say conflict, I don't mean we fell out, but there was this, Martin, if we are going to give any kind of a service, we're going to have to bunker down and do a response service only. And I'm saying, look, I can't do that. We have to fight for neighbourhood policing. And it was, we have to do it. And that's what came about as a result of the election. I had that mandate from the public to do it. And it's been very tricky for the chief constable. When they first went to this model, it looked for a few weeks like the nighttime economy was going to overwhelm them. We may have had those conversations, I'm sure we did, but they stuck with it. And there's a lot more to do yet, because all these new officers, these 20,000, we've only had 45 so far. And it's a 2 to 3 year training program. The ones you're seeing hit the streets now in big time are the ones that you pay for through your council tax, which I get criticised for. Thank you, panel, for agreeing it in 2 years running, but it's a big hit. So that's really important. Compared to other forces, I think that absolute clarity from the day I became commissioner that I would retain PCSOs helped. Some forces, I can't remember which one it was in the east side of the country, decided that they would have to get rid of PCSOs. Whether they went through it with it or not, I don't know, but a lot of them were reduced down. But, you know, credit to the chief, Rhiannon, and all the chief officers, they know that as long as I'm commissioner, we have to have neighbourhood policing, and it's paid off. When you look at the next figures around performance, that is equally important because, you know, it is difficult times. And Karen's point was absolutely right about the specialist services. About 5 years ago, there was a difficult report for the constabulary around how they were dealing with serious sexual offences. Quite rightly so too. That improvement plan has been monitored through by my office, and they're in a far, far better position than they ever were. But of course, the county council had an equally bad report. And one of the things I did at the time was to talk to Mark Hawthorne and others to say, Mark, we both need to make improvements. I'll never politicise this. And I didn't. Some have. But we mustn't go back there. We must learn. But I think we're doing better than many forces, but they're all our friends and neighbours. You know, they are. And what is being done to this force, unfairly, and I'll stop here, is they're trying to compare us, some people, with forces that are not even remotely similar to ours. That's what we do. We compare fairly.
Okay, I've allowed you to carry on a bit, Martin. But
it's that time of year, isn't it?
How many? No, I just wanted to know. I'm just curious. Just how many forces are kind of moving in a similar direction?
Well, I'll let Rhiannon ask that because she knows the police better than me.
Okay.
Yeah, there's definitely a recognition nationally that police service lost a lot of trust and confidence when neighbourhood policing started to be withdrawn, and that was definitely a consequence of austerity. And there are forces across the country at different stages of what they actually withdrew and how much they're trying to put back into neighbourhood policing, but it's a big focus. And Karen's absolutely right. Those officers then need to be trained to be able to see the signs of exploitation and have that contact on the ground that they can refer into specialist officers. So we haven't devolved everything out, and different forces are on a different path, but there is definitely a consensus that although it can feel expensive to have that root and branch neighbourhood policing, it's actually essential in UK policing because that's what we do. That's how we police by consent.
I'm just glad to hear it. It's not just here; it's across the country. I think we've. I didn't see anyone else with their hand up. So if we, sorry, Colette, did you? Or are you just saying good? You're on mute.
Yes, thank you, Chair. You can have just something for Martin, please.
Sorry?
Yes, I have a question. Well, not a question. I just want to speak to Martin, if that's
Yep, I'm here. Yeah.
Hi, Martin. I totally agree with you. You can't compare Gloucestershire Police Force to, say, Birmingham Police Force. I think you do a splendid job here in Gloucestershire. Thank you
very much, and so do I.
Okay,
we'll leave it at that. People of Gloucestershire should be proud of their force, because what happened in Bristol, you know, an officer said to me after Clapham Common, they all hate us, don't they? And they don't, not in Gloucestershire. Most of the public support their police, and I will always support it when they do well. And when they get things wrong, of course, I'll hold them to account for it. But professionally, I won't slag them off for no reason.
Okay, Ruth, do you want to? I think yours is the next presentation, if I'm correct.
Yep, Colin, this is a, can I just encourage people, this is an in-depth presentation. You need to concentrate on it.
Sorry to interrupt, I'm really sorry to interrupt, but it's actually Craig next with policing in the new...
Oh, sorry, yeah, it's two different agendas I've got open. So, I beg your pardon, Craig, and I've seen you in the background there, so I do apologise. Craig.
Socially distanced.
Yeah, just to reassure everybody, we're socially distant. It doesn't look like it, but we are. So I'm not going to present a formal presentation on screen. I'm just going to talk to the subject, and I'm really conscious that there'll be a number of questions you want to ask, and it's such a broad topic for discussion, and it's also something which is so variable that I wanted to leave a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. But I've been responsible now since I think February last year as the Force's Gold Commander for our response to everything which was COVID related. So that goes back to the initial planning phase when we first had understandable doomsday predictions about the impact that COVID would have. And I know Martin's already alluded to the fact that the initial reasonable worst case scenarios were far, far worse than they anticipated, how they turned out to be in the end. I've also been the chair of the Strategic Coordinating Group, which is our partnership response since July. It was Sarah Scott, the Director of Public Health, prior to that point until she undertook the chair of the Health Protection Board. And I've also been involved as our Gold Commander primarily around most protests that have taken place throughout the period as well. So I have quite a consistent understanding of where we've been with COVID and also where we might be in the future. I think the purpose of today's presentation is just to provide some reassurance about that consistent approach, how we've learned the lessons of the first lockdowns, how we've emerged from those lockdowns in terms of crime types, incident demand, and therefore what we're predicting as best as we can and how we might deal with that in the future. So very briefly, when we went into the first lockdown, for the first 4 or 5 months, we had broadly a 28% reduction in all crime. That's gone up a little bit over the whole 12 months, but certainly in the first stages there was a 28% overall reduction. It's nowhere near 28% now, but it's still a significant reduction in overall crime. There were a few things that we anticipated. We anticipated domestic abuse would significantly increase, and we also anticipated child abuse would significantly increase. As it transpired, those crime types remained reasonably static, and we don't just look at our crime figures, we also look at things such as the referrals coming in through GDAS and other referrals that come into social care as an example, to understand where the true demand is and the extent to which some of that is being hidden. What we did see actually a couple of months on was referrals start to go up in certain areas of the business, but not immediately. There tends to be a little bit of a lag time. Fraud, cybercrime, and in particular courier fraud, which I'll describe a little bit later, are things that have gone up throughout the last 12 months. They're pretty much the only crime types that we have seen an increase in. But there's been some really dramatic reductions in certain crime types, which particularly frustrate people and cause people anxiety. So burglary within the home, as an example, reduced in the first 4 or 5 months of lockdown by about 60 or 70%. That wasn't the case necessarily for all burglary, because people's sheds were still getting broken into because people were trying to steal bikes when everybody wanted a bike during lockdown, as an example. But broadly, burglary went down quite significantly. And if you were to look at the burglary figures, which I think Ruth may go on to later, you'll see that actually there's a significant reduction over the entire period. Other things of interest, antisocial behaviour. Overall, demand for antisocial behaviour seemed to go down, but in the way that our figures are recorded, antisocial behaviour may appear to have gone up in the future, because anything that was COVID related, so any breach of COVID got categorised as a breach of, got categorised as antisocial behaviour. In other words, police systems weren't sophisticated enough in the first few months to record COVID breaches in a different way, so it all got categorised as environmental antisocial behaviour, which went up from about 5 a month to about something like 1,000% increase. Now, we know that's not the reality, that's just the way things are recorded. In the last few months, we've tried to learn from the emergence of lockdown in June and July and into August of last year, what we learned then going back into lockdown in October, November, and how crime trends changed, and we tried to respond according to that. So we've had an operation running since January called Operation Surge. What Operation Surge has done is tried to take spare capacity in our system, with overall incidents in crime demand being down, and surge that into areas where we feel there have been increases, or where we feel some of our other resources and departments across the force have needed to benefit. So as an example, Operation Surge initially went into domestic abuse, child abuse teams to try and support the additional investigations that they were carrying over the period and clear some of that investigative backlog. It went in to support some of the difficulties we're experiencing in the criminal justice system as a consequence of the closure of Cheltenham Magistrates Court in the first instance, or temporary closure, and of course the impact across the criminal justice system of COVID-19 and the delays. And that continues with that Operation Surge activity, which focuses on local areas, is also looking at, in April, surging in relation to roads policing, because we feel all of a sudden a lot of people will be back on the roads, and there may be issues around drink drive, drug drive, perhaps elderly people who haven't been behind the wheel for a long period of time going back behind the wheel, and us needing to have an enhanced focus around roads policing in April. And then it will again move into vulnerability in May. That's because that's the point at which we believe there'll be a surge in child abuse referrals. It didn't happen first time when children first went back to school. We started to see the surge in referrals about 2 months after children went back first time. So we're trying to prepare ourselves for that for the future. And the government's made available about £442,000 worth of funding for Gloucestershire. I'm pleased to say that the Commissioner has made all of that available to the operational side of the business to respond to our emergence from lockdown. And so we've also invested in other areas for the next 4 to 6 months. So additional resources in our child abuse investigation teams, additional resources in our criminal justice teams to deal with that backlog I mentioned. We've got a plan around our nighttime economy return. We do anticipate that, of course, if we have good weather combined with bank holidays, combined with other weekends, as we come out of lockdown and pubs open, whether that be gardens or whether that actually be internal, we need to get our response in place. So much of that is dependent on the weather, that we put some innovative plans in place around how we'll resource that, so we can withdraw resources if we need to if the weather doesn't look like it's going to be very good, because we know that has a huge impact. We'll put additional resources and made the money available to our force contact centre, because we know as we come out of lockdown that there'll be a surge in the number of calls into the service. And I know we've mentioned the violence against women and girls issues quite rightly. We've also bolstered our CID teams, so that on times where we might have weekends, bank holidays, good weather, we would expect to see an increase in serious sexual offences during that time, particularly against women and girls. So we've bolstered our efforts there as well. And of course, we're trying to marry all that up against supporting G7 in the southwest, which of course is Devon and Cornwall in June, and will be a huge abstraction of resources across the country actually, but there's an impact on us as a region. We've got the Euros coming up as well in June, which seem to coincide with us emerging out of, or potentially emerging out of all restrictions, in addition to the bank holidays that I've mentioned and a number of other events. So it's going to be a really challenging time, I think, over the next few months, and overlay that with the discussions we've already had around protests, the extent to which the public feel the need to protest over that period. We have got plans in place around how we'll address some of that. But of course, much of it we're gauging almost on a day-by-day basis and trying to use our learning from the initial lockdowns to understand what the impact on demand will be over the next few months. And of course, the final piece of the jigsaw puzzle for us, which is hugely important, and Rhiannon's already touched upon supportive leadership and well-being, is how do we balance all those demands which we're likely to face now, particularly through May, June and July, with the extent to which we want our staff to take time off, have decent rest and recuperation. People haven't been able to take holidays in the normal way for the last 12 months. And of course, that's not just the police, that's everybody in society has had to manage their way through that. But of course, if people can't relax and recuperate and recover in the same way, we're really conscious about the longer term impacts on health and well-being. And we've put measures in place to try and address that in terms of how much annual leave and time off people can carry over. We've built that over 2 years rather than the usual year, so that people can take more leave next year and again in 22-23 leave year, so that we can somehow flatten out those issues of extensive annual leave which haven't been taken to date. And of course, that's really difficult to balance because we want to give our people time off to rest, recover, and recuperate appropriately. So it's a huge area which we're continuing to focus on, and we've been working not just in Gloucestershire but with all regional colleagues to understand what Wiltshire, Dorset, Devon and Cornwall, and Devon and Somerset are doing in response to lockdown. We regularly speak with other ACC colleagues in the southwest region to make sure that we check and test what we're doing and gain all the good ideas that those other forces might also have in place as well, and to see or to ensure that we emerge out of lockdown in the most effective, efficient way that we possibly can. But as I've said, so much of it is down to best professional judgment and interpretation and balance. And of course, there'll be a number of other curveballs no doubt thrown our way over the next few months, which will turn things on their head again. So I just want to provide some reassurance around our response, the extent to which that's supported by the Police and Crime Commissioner, and understandably them holding us to account for our delivery of our response to both COVID, but also the emergence of lockdown. And I'm more than happy to take questions on what is, I know, a very broad, flexible topic. Thank you. Commissioner.
Thank you, Craig. We speak often, as you know. I think I'll open up to questions, really. But again, I'm not a broken record. I just really think we should thank the police. It's been a very difficult year for them. I've said before, they haven't got everything right, but then again, nor have I. I doubt you have either. It's a very tough time now, and I think we do need to get behind them and support them to make the right decisions going forward. And there's some big issues to be dealt with for society. So I'll leave it for you, Chair, to take questions for me or for Rhiannon or for Craig as you think fit.
Okay, well, the hand I see up is my Vice Chair, Steve Robinson. So, Steve, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Could I ask Craig, is there sort of any evidence, because of the long wait for court appearances, is there any evidence that these folk that are still possibly out in the community that would normally have been somewhere else, because are they committing more crimes? Do we know that due to the having to wait for so long, that we're having more crimes committed by those people that would normally have faced some sort of
So it's hard to tell. I mean, if you look at our overall numbers of crimes, particularly acquisitive crimes, they seem to be very dependent on whether we're in lockdown or not. So burglary is hugely dependent on lockdown we've established over the last 12 months. Shoplifting, very similar as well. So those acquisitive crimes it's hard to establish the extent to which that's impacted by the length of time in the court system. And of course, there's a difference between the waiting times in the magistrates court system and also the Crown Court system. And again, if we're talking about acquisitive crime, that would tend to be dealt with in the magistrates court system. And of course, we have now got the Nightingale Court being set up in Cirencester, which will hopefully try and alleviate some of the pressure from the system and keep that as quick as possible. It's more difficult in the Crown Court system to try and get those cases heard more quickly, and that's where the bigger concerns probably do exist in terms of people being brought to trial. But as it stands at the moment, you would suggest from the overall crime records that we've got that it's not having a huge impact at the moment, but there's a long tail to the issues in the CJ system, and I think we're predicting and we're resourcing at least 2, possibly 3 to 4 years worth of additional pressure and demand on the criminal justice system. And of course, the PCC chairs the Criminal Justice Board. That's not just a policing issue, that's one for ourselves and of course all other criminal justice partners. We've talked about the impact that we think and the benefits that we think will happen from the tagging system, which will be a pilot force, and that will absolutely focus on acquisitive criminals that can cause really significant harm to our communities very quickly. Commissioner, I don't know whether you wanted to add anything there at all.
Just a couple of things. Very, very helpful answer. The big impact of the broken court system, and pretty much everybody accepted it's broken, even the people who run it, is the impact on victims, particularly women, domestic abuse, domestic violence. Try to get those, even when the police begin their investigation, to get the CPS decision and then to try to get a court date that actually happens. And COVID's made it worse, but make no mistake, it was pretty awful before. And the discussions I've been having with other commissioners is that has to change. From government, there's a suggestion they want to now fast track those sort of cases through, which I think is a good idea. But of course, that puts everybody else further down the queue. We need a fundamental root and branch reform of criminal justice. That has to happen. So it's the impact on victim I'm particularly concerned about. The issue on are people out there committing crime? Well, maybe, but unfortunately, our probation system fell apart a few years ago. I think they're trying to put it back together. They reversed the privatisation of it. Our local MP will have some say in that. I've yet to meet him on that. We will discuss it at some point, no doubt. But we have to have rehabilitation as well. And it's hard to begin the rehabilitation before you've actually had the court date. So that's why, for younger people in particular, we have the Children's First programme to try to divert them away from the criminal justice system in all but the most serious cases. And you know they're delayed. The Nightingale Court has made a huge difference. It's beginning to bring that level down in the Magistrates Court. Of course, now it's feeding through to the Crown. They're very pleased with it. I've had lots of letters of thanks. I was kind of disappointed when somebody called it political gesturing as possibly the worst kind. And that was a candidate for the PCC. So I was just political gesturing of the worst kind. And I found that very offensive. And he should be ashamed of himself. He knows who he is. Take it down off your website because it's rubbish. So that's what I think. I think we're going to get there, and so we move on.
No, could I just say thank you, Martin, for pushing, because I know you had to keep pushing for the Nightingale Court, and that has helped. So thank you.
We're the only one the only region that's got it. There was a lot of opposition for some reason. I don't know why. The judges like it, the magistrates like it. It was cost neutral. I always said it would be. For some reason, it was said that it was a falling down building. We hadn't maintained it. Actually, we had a maintenance agreement with the Ministry of Justice. We were paying half and half. It'd been used as a mock court for children to learn about criminal justice just a year before. It was a really good court. I think it cost us about £30,000 to put it back together, which we paid, and we get that back in a nominal rent over the next 12 months. Great win for everybody. Why it was opposed, goodness only knows. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, I've got the next hand up is Johnny, but I think we need to try and keep some of the sort of political posturing just toned down a little bit.
Yeah. Colin, I've had it for the last 4 years, so I'm not going to stop now.
I know, and it was certainly in evidence at the last county council meeting as well. Anyway, Johnny.
Thanks, Chair, and I'll hope that comment was directed at the former speaker rather than myself. Question. So we're talking about confidence in the criminal justice system, right? And that works both ways, because obviously there's victims who are less likely to press charges, for example, witnesses who get bored and give up. My concern is also, and my question is really about whether or not the police has detected any changes in attitude of the people who are committing the crimes, who believe they're more likely to get away with things, and with restrictions lifting and people being out of their house more often, are we expecting to see burglaries go back up in this context. And I appreciate there's a fine line between, we don't want to do any scaremongering, but does the police need to run a public information campaign of everybody watch out because the criminals are about to come out of lockdown as well? And I wondered if we had any thoughts towards that. And the second question I wanted to ask was about attitudes towards policing of the nighttime economy. Like everyone else, I'm very much looking forward to the Euros. I'm actually expecting we're expecting our first child in early June, and I will very much name him after whoever scores the first goal in England versus Scotland if we haven't got a name at that point. But a lot of people are going to want to blow out as soon as the pubs are really back open. And I appreciate there's a tension there between wanting to have sufficient police presence to kind of prevent people from partying a little too hard, but also not want to give the impression that you're being heavy-handed. So there's a delicate balance there, and so I just wanted to ask what the intent is for that situation. Thanks.
Well, I can only pick it up from the PCC's point of view, but it's all about preparedness, and I think they are prepared for it. I think it's a tough ask, mind you, because they've been through a tough year already. So when it gets better for you, it will get harder for them. Because I want to go out to, I didn't do football, but I want to go and watch Formula One. I want to go and have a beer with my mates. So we really have to prepare carefully and gently with the street pastors, with the guardians, with parents, with the colleges, with the nighttime economy, with Safer Gloucestershire, all those people, to make sure it's not one great big party for the next 6 months, because we've already talked about the tinderbox potential for violence. And so I think this is a big responsibility for the local authorities and for the county councils. We all have community safety responsibilities, and for the schools, everybody to be in this together, because potentially we're in for a pretty hairy old summer, in some ways. So I say that nicely, but it just needs to be peaceful, and understand there's a generation of people who haven't been to the pub or haven't been to a nightclub or can't actually form a relationship apart from online. Can you imagine that? But it's not just for the police. This is for the whole community. But Rhiannon and Craig, feel free to. I know you're preparing all the time for this. I know you are. So if you want to add anything, please do.
So perhaps in relation to the burglary question first. When the first lockdown was relinquished, we'd had a huge reduction in burglaries in the home and burglary more generally as well, actually, including commercial burglaries. There was still a number of burglaries being committed by organised crime groups. It seemed to be organised crime groups were pretty much the only people occupying the roads during those early days. And the consequence of that is we targeted a lot of resources towards organised crime groups because, of course, they stick out like a sore thumb when there's not much else on the road, and we had some really good successes during that initial period of lockdown. The extent to which house burglars, as an example, jumped back up when lockdown was lifted, they did go back up, but not to the levels they were before. So trying to understand human behaviour, offending behaviour as we emerged out of lockdown has been really difficult and complicated. So my gut sense is I would anticipate there'll be an increase when all of a sudden people's homes are vacated for periods of time. How much that will be, I don't know. Are we targeting resources at known repeat burglars in anticipation of that? Absolutely. So, be rest assured that we'll target our activities towards the areas where we think there'll be a significant increase in crime. In relation to nighttime economy, much has been said already. We have a comprehensive spreadsheet which sets out all the respective dates where we've got either a lockdown releasing, a bank holiday weekend, Euros, G7s, and we've put additional resourcing in place up front to be able to cater for that. What we've done innovatively this time is, because we want to be as efficient as possible with our resources, is that we've worked with our federation to be able to say, look, we'll provide, rather than cancelling all the officers' rest days now for all of those dates, we know that so much of it will be related, so much of the demand will be related to the weather, that we've given ourselves an option that enables us to refine our resourcing 3 days before any particular weekend, so we can stand resources down and utilise them at later times when we get increases when the weather's better. And that's innovative, because the alternative would be those staff would be on duty and they just wouldn't be required, because we wouldn't get the same volume of calls, we wouldn't get the same same elements of people in the nighttime economy. So we've tried to use an efficient, effective process to be able to do that, which is very different from what we would do in ordinary years. So because it's such a prolonged period and we're so concerned about the demands, but linking that absolutely to the warmth and the weather, which we all know has a huge impact.
But we want to go out too.
I can't see anyone else with their hand up, but maybe just have a quick flick through. No, are there no more comments on that? I just want to thank you though, because that was quite a comprehensive run through what has happened and what the intentions are. So I think that's really useful, and I think the lack of questions is no reflection on the quality of the report, because it's answered, I think, a number of questions that may have come up, and it's very useful for us as panel members to know that. So thank you very much.
But Colin, is it achieved what you wanted? Because my job is to be assured by the Chief Constable that he and his officers and staff are performing effectively and proportionately. Is the panel reassured? Anybody?
I think I'm seeing nods around, and I think we do all appreciate the difficulties that forces had, particularly the sort of dilemmas that you get, and you rehearsed it a few times, the ability for people to protest, but the laws that are there and keeping people COVID safe is a really tough call. And I think most of us understand that, but I think having that rehearsed again for us has been really useful. And I think you said a number of times that the police have done a great job, not always got it right every time, but it's how you actually understand and learn from those times that you've got it wrong, something that Karen was saying earlier. So I think I'm content. I'd look for anyone else, but I think people, I did see a number of heads nodding anyway.
We'll take our lead then, if that's okay, because we're going to go and join the minute silence. So thank you.
Yeah, I was keeping an eye on the time myself.
Thank you.
But yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, bye. But I think you've had your answer from me and no one else. I'm assuming that's okay. Yeah.
Well, good.
There is the we go on next to Richard Bradley, but it's very close to 12 o'clock. I'm not quite sure quite what to do apart from twiddle our thumbs till 12 or have the minute a little bit early. Don't know what people feel.
So should we sort of come back at 12 o'clock, just have 3 minutes leg stretch or something like that, or come back at just after?
I don't know. Have you got an idea, Andrea?
And I think if you're going to participate in the minute silence, everybody needs to be here at 12.
Yeah.
To be frank, and it's only 2 minutes to go, so I think everybody might just need to go on mute and wait till 12 when you can start the minute silence when we hit 12 o'clock.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that.
Or do you want me to let you know when it's 12?
Well, I've got a watch, but we didn't synchronise, so
I'll let you know.
Well, I'll just say a couple of things. Some great news for the Chief Constable. As part of our Safer Streets bid, I asked the Chief Constable if he could actually release to us a senior female police officer to help us with the violence against girls, and he's released a Chief Inspector for that purpose. So I'll just say as an update, but I'll be quiet now.
Okay.
It's now 12 o'clock. Okay, it is now 12:01.
Right, thank you. So we'll carry on with the meeting, but thank you all for participating in that minute silence. Richard, it's your Chief Exec's report next.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to pick out a few points from the report, item 4 talks about the Commissioners' Fund. We were able to launch a very short round funding in October with grants up to £1,000. We had 49 applications and 36 of those were offered a grant of £1,000, and that was to help a lot of organisations that are actually struggling during the period of COVID, which I'm sure you understand. As part of the bigger picture, I am a member of Gloucestershire Funders. It's a collaboration of 8 of the major funders in the county. Collaboratively, we've awarded over £800,000 to 130 organisations in the county. So we're all there trying to help those organisations that we need to survive. So post-COVID, that they're still there and in existence. So that's pretty positive. And we've had item 5. We've had some additional funding from the Ministry of Justice, just short of 120k. And from that, we've allocated funding to the providers of services that support victims of domestic abuse. That's a 70k injection of cash. And those that provide support to victims of sexual violence, 48k. We've also put another bid in to the MOJ for some more money. You'll see the organisations and the posts that we're seeking to fund. And that's for more ISVAs and IDVAs, acronyms, Independent Sexual Violence Advisor and Independent Domestic Violence Advisors. There is a demand. I think the demand for the services has increased. So we need to ensure that the provision is there to make sure that those victims get the right support. Item 6, obviously the PCC and local elections happen on the 6th of May. With the results, we believe the results will be announced on the 10th of May. We have, as normal, an election board, which I chair, which is made up of membership of members of the Constabulary, the Deputy Chief Constable, the Head of Fraud, our media teams, and a couple of my colleagues from the OPCC. We meet on a very regular basis, and I think that frequency will increase before May. Our aim is to ensure that the process is run fairly and transparently, and what we've agreed is that all correspondence from any of the candidates comes through our single point of contact, which is Ruth Greenwood. So Ruth is our collator, our coordinator, to make sure it all runs fairly. The PARO, the Police Area Returning Officer, is John McGinty, who's the Chief Executive of Gloucester City Council. So we're working with John very closely. So that's all in hand. And I think Martin covered the bit about Furlong very well. I think there's a nice picture on the report which shows the projected image of our new administration operational centre building at Furlong. We very much look forward to that opening. The building should be complete in May 2022 and be fully occupied by August. Thank you.
Thank you. So anyone with questions? I can't see any hands up in the participants column, but anyone for any questions? No, I think that's all. Thank you, Richard. So we can move on to the next item.
Chair, can I just introduce that, if I may? Can I just encourage panel members? I've seen the presentation. It's detailed. It does need concentration. Feel free to ask questions when we get to the end. But I'm very pleased it's here. What it does, it sets out the ONS and the official data, which is what the Home Office, HMIC, and others use to measure the performance of the force, pretty much. So it's good official data, which I think the panel may find helpful. That's certainly the intention. Thank you, Ruth.
Ruth, over to you.
Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. So if you can tell me when you can see it, that'd be great.
That seems to be up and running.
Okay, brilliant. Right, thank you, Chair. So the first part of my presentation is to run through some of the developments that have taken place within the OPCC and the constabulary over the last year or two regarding performance monitoring. The OPCC is involved in this development from the very early stages to thinking of what it is we want, and more laterally as a very much a key stakeholder in what we end up with as the final product. So if I can just take you to the image on the right, what you've got here is one of the things that the OPCC's done is to develop an overview using which is the iQuanto. You would have heard me talk about this data before. This is Home Office audited data, the sort of data that ends up in ONS reports. So this is the cemented in stone data that we use. And I provide that information to all of the CSPs to help them realise their statutory obligations around the Crime and Disorder Act and support their prioritisation and evaluation activity at CSP level. We've been doing that for, we started doing that in late 2019, and the feedback we've had is incredibly positive, actually. I presented to the Safe Gloucestershire board recently, and I've had several conversations on the back of that. What we've also done, and this is really probably the main part of this section of the presentation, is develop a framework within the constabulary for performance. And what we didn't want to do with this is produce a standalone framework that just met the needs of chief officers, Martin, for example. What we needed to do was develop something that served the needs of the organisation. And that is exactly what we've achieved, and I'll run through that now. Okay, to help us with the development of the performance framework, we enlisted the support of our head of analysis, research and planning. If you hear me talking about the ARP team or the ARP team, that's what I mean. It's our analysis, research and planning. Ryan Hartley, who's been our force lead on that for a while, developed this approach to how we develop performance in the constabulary, performance monitoring, which covered culture, strategic clarity, structures and processes, and resources. And what that ended up with is what you can see is quite a busy slide if I take you through it. So what we've got here is that it's really important in developing any framework around performance, it's bringing the organisation with you. And the whole cultural piece was integral to how we developed this. And that's been very much led by the DCC, John Stratford. And the reason why this is so important is because we have to go back in time a little bit. In 2010, the then Home Secretary, Theresa May, removed performance measures, performance indicators, I should say, from community safety, from policing. And that was probably, I think, and I make no political statement, but partly, I should say, in response to the numerous measures that were in place before. My career goes back 20 years. I remember certainly pages and pages of measures from public service agreements, local area agreements, best value performance indicators. The list went on. So in 2010, that was wiped away. So in that time, there has been a bit of a void when it comes to indicators. And so over time, certainly in some sectors, and I include local government as well as when we've talked to partners, as well as policing, performance has become somewhat of a bit of a dirty word. It's become the indicators are used as in the same way as measures, and they're not the same thing. I know certainly when you talk to certain officers that have got a bit more service behind them, they remember being bashed with a stick when it came to performance. So that suddenly not having any performance measurements was you know, in some respects a welcomed move. But what we find ourselves with is, as I said, we felt that it was something that we needed to bring back. We're not talking about indicators. We're talking about agreed common notions of what good looks like, or what acceptable looks like, and what poor looks like, and therefore having one version of the truth when it comes to performance. So that's the corporate bit there. In order to achieve this as well, we've needed to invest in our capacity and our capability to deliver, and that's led to an expansion of our ARP team, our analysis, research and planning team, including planning officers that work directly with heads of departments in overseeing their performance and supporting them in identifying exceptions and in identifying improvement activity. Linked to that, and this is absolutely integral, is the development of dashboards. This was, I do remember the paper that came to the PCC's governance board requesting funding to support the development of dashboards, and it's been absolutely a godsend really in helping us move forward with the whole framework work. The dashboards collect the data that is, you can imagine, an organisation like the Constabulary is incredibly data rich. But what it does is it produces information for your services, for your areas of business, to meet your needs. We can look at things like crime trends. We can look at repeat locations. We can also look at file quality. We can look at demand in the control room, FOIs, for example, our complaints information. That's all contained on these dashboards that are accessible by anybody within the organisation. Neighbourhood officers, for example, have a series of dashboards called On My Patch, which shows them exactly what's going on in their neighbourhood. And I have access to all these as well in my role, and other members of the team. I can then move to this area here, the pyramid. You see what that work has done, those planning officers, that dashboard, the development of the culture has led to the position where we're in now, where we're able to very tangibly link what we say we want to do in our strategies and our plans right down to our performance of individual officers. And that is monitored again through dashboards, as I said. What we've also done is develop a scorecard, and that's where our work as key stakeholders came into play very much so. This means that we are able to have oversight, the PCC, the Chief Constable have oversight of what we call the health of the organisation, if you like, and we look at a number of measures, and I've got a couple of slides that details that a little bit more for you. And then finally, we've developed our governance structure to oversee all this, and again, I've got another slide that I go through that, but that is looking at those exceptions that need that additional attention. So these couple of slides just give you an overview of what is contained within those scorecards. This is the stuff that goes to the boards every month, and it'll tell you whether we're performing in line with what we would expect, in line with peers, or whether or not there's an issue that we need to look at. So we've got a number of measures looking at responding to the public that you can see there, including force control room overview. Crime overview, we look at different crime types, compliance, that's linked to our crime data integrity. We also look at vulnerability and crime tags. So we tag things, incidents, for example, if there's child protection or domestic abuse. Just expanding on that a little bit more, we also look at some of our more high profile crimes that that we need to be focused on. So cybercrime, knife crime, rural crime, hate crime, etc. And then custody and justice, we look at detentions in our custody suite, file quality, entrance into the justice system, very important, particularly under our young people becoming adult priority. There's a few other measures there. Moving on, we've got specific measures around vulnerability that you can see there, and that's where we capture our stuff around MISPERS, is missing persons. I must stop talking in this language. We also look at stop and search. And under stop and search, we will look at find rates, which is obviously incredibly important, demographics as well, to look at any disproportionality. Officer assaults is captured, professional standards, that's where we look at complaints and our service recovery activity. Safe and social roads, there's some specific measures there. Workforce developments, as I said, this is not just about crime and antisocial behaviour, this is also about the health of the organisation. So we want to know about officers that are sick, officers that are injured, attrition rates, supportive leadership, very much linked to workforce there, and better together. That's about how we improve the diversity of the organisation in which we work. And for example, I just pick out, we use the information that we gather through our exit interviews to help improve and encourage a learning organisation. So just a little mention about the governance structure. So what we have done is to, you know, as I said, we don't want just a standalone framework that sits on its own outside of anything else. We've incorporated that very much within our governance structure, and everything is sequenced to support the escalation of issues as they arise, or of exceptions, as I should say. So the scorecards are managed at a department level by managers within the organisation. Exceptions are taken to the relevant board. You've got the operational development board and the people development board. So it's really what it says on the tin there, those two areas of business. Exceptions are taken to the performance improvement meeting. This is a monthly meeting that I attend. It's a 4-hour meeting. It's incredibly in-depth, and we go through the exceptions. We also look at the activity of the ARP team, and we monitored improvement plans as well. This in turn reports to both the Constabulary Governance Board, which is chaired by the Chief Constable, and obviously the Commissioner's Governance Board as well. This isn't everything though, and it's really important that you don't think that this is just it. So I've just captured a couple of areas that also, a couple of other mechanisms that are in place that monitor performance. So we've talked already about the IOPC, the Independent Office of Police Conduct. They monitor performance in relation to conduct issues around complaints, service recovery. They come in, they do they not only just gather the data, but they actually come into the organisation on a regular basis to talk to professional standards and to our team as well. In fact, I think Martin's got a meeting tomorrow with them. We luckily have a good relationship with them, and they certainly don't raise any particular areas of concern. HMIC FRS, obviously, they capture performance in part of their reports, and they report on that as an independent assessment of how the force is doing. That's a really welcomed documents that they produce. I did want to just mention the COVID Gold assessments. We have obviously moved into a gold, silver, bronze structure when COVID came in, as we do with any major incident. And to support that process and that structure, we were having weekly performance oversight documents from our ARP team to support that gold group, which also I sat on. That would give us information about rising crimes, force control room. Always used to see, whenever there was a change in governance announcements, for example, you would see fluctuations in demand on the control room. So people call the police to want to understand what the rules mean for them. But we also will monitor things like domestic abuse and fraud, issues that have been picked up there. I did want to just mention about scrutiny panel. You heard Rhiannon earlier on talking about the legitimacy panel. So things like stop and search panels sit underneath the legitimacy panel. And they monitor the use of stop and search, find rates, and the demographic proportionality associated with that. We also have a use of force scrutiny panel and out of court disposal panel. And we will shortly be starting, and I mentioned this in the last meeting, a residence panel to help us with our oversight functions around complaints processes. We're looking to replicate what Avon and Somerset do there. It's a really good, well-used model, and we want to replicate that so we can hear from lay people really whether or not they feel we are proportionate and have a good, robust system when it comes to monitoring. And they will be dip sampling the complaints that we received. The Chief Constable also has quarterly monitoring meetings with the head of the ARP and the Deputy Chief Constable. Martin and I attend that, and obviously there's also Chief Constable and PCC one-to-one meetings where they often raise performance issues. I did also want to quickly measure. We've obviously had this week the information, the information from the PCC review, and we really do welcome the opportunity to be able to share a set of measures that other forces will be able to measure. We'll have to share as well other OPCCs. And the indications are that we'll be looking at those neighbourhood crimes, sort of thing I was talking about earlier on with safer streets, but some other measures as well. We can therefore demonstrate clearly the performance of the organisation in the same way as other areas. That's part of the problem with the removal of the measures that we've had. We've not had one easy way to compare performance across force areas. So if we're looking at the capturing of specific crime types, that's really, really welcomed. We did feed into the consultation around that, and my hope was that those measures would also be shared with the community safety partnerships, because I think we all recognise that when it comes to neighbourhood incidents and crimes, it has to be dealt with in partnership, not solely by the police. So at that point, I can pause for questions or I can carry on, because I'm going to go on to a bit more about data now. You're on mute, Chair.
Excuse me, yeah. I can't see any hands up, and with the screen sharing, I can't see all the participants very easily. So please make yourself known if you've got a question at this stage.
Sorry, Chair. Ray Brassington has got his hand up.
Okay, Ray.
Yeah, thank you. Just ask Ruth, the independent office of police complaints. What sort of background are those people from? Are they retired professionals?
Not necessarily.
No.
No, they come from all different backgrounds. They may come from a background. Oh, sorry, there's a bit of an echo. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so they may come from a policing background, because one of the as Martin was saying earlier on, police complaints is overseen by legislation and guidance. It's incredibly complicated, and to understand that, the default position is those who have worked within it, those who have been in professional standards, for example. But I know that there's the IOPC have done a lot of work to try and bring on more people with different backgrounds into their organisation to help them do their work. Okay, right. So I'll move on then, if that's okay, Chair.
Yeah, please do.
Could I just ask?
Okay, so as I've said,
just 1 minute. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Did I hear someone?
Yeah.
So is that David?
Yes, please.
Okay, David.
So just on the one thing you mentioned was the stop and search, and you're collecting data on demographics, and that sort of throws up the question about what does that mean in substance in terms of what are you seeking to do there? Do you mean you're just as likely to stop an 80-year-old for stop and search as an 18-year-old, or what are you looking to map that demographic data against?
Okay, so stop and search is an area that's very contentious, and obviously there's a lot of comment about how it's used disproportionately against certain demographics, certainly Black and minority ethnic groups. So it's really important that, and all forces do this, we're not alone in this, all forces monitor the use of stop and search to ensure that if there is overrepresentation of certain demographics within that have been stop and searched, there's an explanation for that. That is where the scrutiny panel comes in. They will look at that to make sure that it is legitimate. The legitimacy part of policing is very, very important. So that's what they're looking at, and it can be males, it can be females, it can be any type of demographic, but particularly in when we're looking at Black and minority ethnic groups.
I think what we're saying, David, is we would want to know if all of a sudden there was an upturn in 80-year-olds being pulled over and searched by the police. Certainly is something I think I'd take up with the chief to ask why. And I suppose the same would apply if we're stopping an awful lot of young people who are Black or Asian or even white. Just that explanation as to why is it. And then the challenge goes to the police and to the community to say, this does look disproportionately high. Can you tell us why? And, that is the $64,000 question. Why is it still that black and ethnic minority males in particular are being pulled over by the police more often than other groups? And when we can work out why, then we can start to understand it. So I get your question, but it's really important data, which is
sure. The root of my question is, and take the context of London, obviously, you know, that because in the search for seeming to signal that we are being proportionate, we reduce the number of people from certain backgrounds who we stop and search, or we waste resources stopping and searching people where the actual risk that those people are engaged in criminal activity is negligible, in order to signal a greater sense of balance in the community. We're actually damaging that community, because, you know, in the case of London, you have the minority on minority rate of certain types of crime are very high, and so by not focusing on that minority perpetrators, you end up actually impairing the police's ability to address a legitimate grievance.
It's a very wise point, David, and I think I agree with everything you say, except if you are that black young man who's a barrister who's been pulled over 5 times on his way to court to do a prosecution case, you want to know why the police are doing it. And, you know, I suppose if you ask where the biggest drug problem in the county is now, it's spread all over. And you could ask why the police aren't pulling over middle-aged people in the Cotswolds on the way to their cocaine parties. Because it happens. And I'm actually being, I know it is quite humorous, but actually it's a serious issue which the government are taking very, very seriously right now. It's not just young kids doing a bit of cannabis, it's all over the county. And all the cocaine that's coming in the county isn't ended up in young kids or in the black communities or that. It's ended up in the Cotswolds because they can afford to buy it.
If I can add as well, that's one of the reasons why, I mean, hopefully you'll get from the presentation that I'm going to give, the bits of the presentation I'm going to give now, is context is vital. And that's why when you look at stop and search data, you look at it alongside the find rate as well. So how many times when you stop someone did you find drugs, did you find a weapon? That's vitally important. Everything is important, but that find rate is really justifies the stop and search in the first place. So am I okay to move on?
Yeah, do carry on. I can't see anyone. Yep.
Okay. So as I said to you before, I have, in my role, I have access to all the performance tools that the constabulary have. I have access to all their data as well, apart from the incredibly highly sensitive stuff, you know, maybe the stuff that Special Branch do or some colleagues in CID. But the general terms, I have access to anything that I would like. I also attend PIM. But when I'm looking at performance, I think it's incredibly important to put things into context. I'm very, very driven by that, and my colleagues in the OPCC will hear me banging on about this ad nauseum. And one way of doing that is to look at our performance in comparison with peers. And we have the tool iQuanta that is, as I said earlier on, is Home Office audited data that enables us to do just that, to look at our performance alongside peers. And we are compared as a county among a group of 8 forces. We've got North Yorkshire, Wiltshire, Devon and Cornwall, West Mercia, Warwickshire, Suffolk and Cambridgeshire. Those are the areas that we compare to. We don't compare to Avon and Somerset. We don't compare to Dorset. We compare to those areas because they're most similar demographically. And this information we get in advance of the stuff that goes into the ONS report. So what you see here will be in those ONS reports in a couple of months' time. And the data that I'm looking at is the last full year that we have, which is up to December 2020. So this chart here gives you the crime rates per 1,000 population of every force in the country. And I've identified those areas that are in our most similar group. I've identified the England and Wales average there. And you can see here that at the end of December 2020, Gloucestershire had the 5th lowest rate of crime in England and Wales. And I ask you to come back to that in the rest of the presentation. So whatever we talk about in fluctuations across the board, that's what I'm asking you to come back to, because we are a low crime area. That's not to say crime doesn't happen, and when it does happen, it is devastating and appalling, and we prioritise it. But it really, really important that we put our position in context. I'm also I also think it's really important to look at how we've performed over the years. So what you've got on the bullet points here is the position over time. The data on icons goes back to 2010. So I've given you the position in the country, in England and Wales, since 2010 right up to 2019. This is a really busy chart, and I apologise for that. But what I wanted to do was show you, because you will quite often hear in reporting or in comments how the percentage changes in terms of crime, how we compare to previous years. Again, I'm all about context. So what I've done here is show you how 2020 compares to every year going back to 2010. So you can see here, this is 20 compared to 2010. Here we've got 20 versus 2014. So whichever, whatever story you want to create here, you can show whether or not crime has gone up or crime has gone down. Long term, we can see that crime has gone down. And you can see in the short term, so this is 2020 versus 2019, we are very, very much in line with our peers in terms of England and Wales and our most similar group. There's not really much between it. I think it's inevitable that we would see reductions in crime in 2020 because of COVID. So again, that's really important, why we put it in the context of peers, so we can see whether or not we've done better or worse, if that motivates you. Okay, so that's that. This chart shows you crime rates over time. So just like the first chart showed you the crime rate for England and Wales, most similar group, all the forces in England and Wales, this one looks at it as a trend over time. And what you can see, the blue line here is England and Wales, the green line is Gloucestershire, and the grey line is our most similar group. And you can see that what's happened in Gloucestershire is really similar to what's happened in our peer, amongst our peers and amongst in England and Wales. But you can also see the very big difference between rates between Gloucestershire and the England and Wales average. And I've just, on the bullet points here, for each year, shown you the difference between there and there. So those differences. And in the last 5 years, the average difference is 25.58. So there's 25 less people victims of crime in Gloucestershire for every 1,000 people compared to the national average. What's interesting is the constabulary do a calculation where they look at percentage changes and rates all in one, and they look at whether or not we are in line with peers or not. And that table, that graph that you look at, will having Gloucestershire smack bang in the middle of what would be considered normal. There is nothing extraordinary that's happening in Gloucestershire, good or bad. We are performing as would be expected for a force of our size with our demographic. So that was all crime. So what I wanted to do was then show you what that means by different offence groups. So I've got burglary, public order, sexual offences, etc. You can see the categories along there, and in this table here just shows you the number of offences that you can see. And these aren't rates; these are actual volumes of crime. So what you can see here is this line here is violence without injury, and you can see where's public order. Public order is this dark line here. So yeah, we can see increases there. But if I can take you back to 2019, when the Chief Constable came and spoke to the panel about the crime data integrity inspection and the remedial work that needed to take place, there were offence groups that we were expecting to see increases in, and those are that is what we can see here. What we found through the work that's been done is that incidents that had been recorded as antisocial behaviour, for example, are now having to be reclassified as public order, for example. So we are seeing an expected increase in those areas. But I just want to bring you to these two charts here. What you can see here is the iQuanta most similar group comparison. And you can see this one here is violence against the person. So that's that. And this one here is public order. And even though we're seeing those increases, you can see that actually we have low rates of those crimes compared to our peers. This one here is just below the lower bound limit. What you would expect to see is us between these blue lines, or probably closer to the black line, would be considered normal. And you can, this in public order, Gloucestershire is bang on where you would expect to be in terms of public order. So what we would expect to see as a result of this work is probably a reduction in ASB in the next 12 months or so, when the next data is around produced. So that's quite interesting. That probably won't happen, as Craig mentioned earlier on, because we have classified COVID-related incidents as ASB. So we'll probably see an increase rather than a reduction that we would have thought we'd have. I wanted to just pick up as well on crime in rural communities. This is something that this panel has mentioned several times, and we get questions about in the office as well. So just specifically picking out those districts that are more rural than, I mean, it's all the districts minus Cheltenham and Gloucester. And I've picked out, and I've averaged it out here, so you can see how Gloucestershire rural communities compare to the national average. And what you can see is that, and I've provided information like I have done on previous slides, so the difference between the rural average in England and Wales. And over the last 5 years, the average difference was 44.21 less crimes for every 1,000 people in Gloucestershire compared to the national average. So rural communities do face much lower levels of crimes. As I say, please see that in the context that any crime that happens is obviously terrible. Gloucestershire, if you remember from the slide I showed previously, there was a difference of 25.58 for the national average. So rural communities really do suffer much lower levels of crime. And this here just shows you the percentage difference, again using 2020 as a baseline compared to every year going back to 2010. And you can see over time the differences. So since the impact of COVID, really, you can see big reductions in crime in our rural communities. Now we can look at other things that give us an indication of rural crime, and one of the documents that's really useful and very well publicised is the NFU Rural Crime Report. This shows costs of insurance claims, NFU customers by county, and this is a report that's been running for a number of years. It's really it's a good a bit of information to refer to. Unfortunately, it doesn't give you information about the number of farms that completed the survey. It doesn't also give you the information about the number of farms in each county. So you're not able to provide a real comparison, because it might be that one area had a huge outturn, a huge number of people that completed the survey. And I have actually double checked that with the NFU, and they can't provide me that, unfortunately. It also doesn't provide you the backdrop of the actual crime figures either. It's just their insurance claims. But it is a useful tool, and it's really important that we listen to all of our communities. So this report does give us a good indication of what our farming communities are going through. And you can see here the total amount of claims each year, and the difference compared to 2019, which is the most recent available data in the reports. This is the information that they present in their reports, just so you can see. So this is a percentage change 2019 compared to 2018, and these are the total amounts that have been claimed. So this just equals that, but this is just the information. But it is a good document, and I do welcome it. It does help. So when it comes to antisocial behaviour, the only information that I can get from iQuanta is the Crime Survey of England and Wales data. What I'm reliant on when it comes to peer analysis for antisocial behaviour is the ONS reports that were produced on an annual basis. And I've just included, because I contacted the ONS to say, oh, you know, all I can see is up to March 2020. And they came back to say, actually, they aren't expected to be able to do the next release until July. But there may be some difficulties in that because of COVID. But I pulled together what I can, so you can have a look. So you know we can see how Gloucestershire compares in relation to antisocial behaviour. So this chart here just shows you the percentage of people that are said in the Crime Survey of England and Wales that they are experiencing or witnessing antisocial behaviour, and it's gangs hanging around on the streets, drink-related behaviour, or witnessing any ASB. And you can see here that Gloucestershire is in line with peers in some respects, so 3% higher than the MSG average, and 9% lower than the England and Wales average when you combine all of these different types of ASB. The chart on the right is actually just showing you the same information as the chart that I've just pulled together, which shows you the level of experience of ASB in Gloucestershire amongst our peers. So I don't produce this chart on the right, I just screen grab this from the Home Office, and it shows that we are slightly higher than what would be considered normal, but so that is something that we are mindful of. Just focusing on this again, this is where it gets really interesting to me, and I think there's more work that needs to be done, because if you look at this chart, this is the same chart as in the other slide, other page. So you can see this is experience and witnessing, but this is whether or not people are bothered about it, quite frankly. And you can see people really are saying through the Crime Survey of England and Wales, it's not something they're particularly concerned about, which begs the question. I mean, this is exceptionally low, and because there's such a difference between experience and perception, one of the things that the OPCC is doing is launching a community safety survey, which mirrors questions in the Crime Survey of England and Wales, and will enable us to drill down into the districts, whereas this is at county level. This will enable us to drill down into districts to understand what communities are worried about and concerned about and suffering, and then our CSPs can work together to address those issues. So this chart here is the actual incidents reported to the police of antisocial behaviour. And you can see that Gloucestershire is the green line. So we are high when we look at when we compare to the most similar group and England and Wales. And I've double checked, by the way, that peak there it is correct. That's England and Wales. But what you can see is actually long-term reductions in antisocial behaviour over time. Now, as I said earlier on, we found through the crime data integrity work that a number of things were being recorded as ASB that should have been going into other categories. So violence without injury, that's for example, people on Facebook saying that threatening other people was not actually an injury, but they're threatening it. That might have gone down as ASB. As such, some public order offences. So what we would expect to see is that to come down, but we won't because of COVID, which is a real shame. But you can see here, by way of comparison, our MSG group is showing a 56% reduction against in ASB compared to 2010, and we're showing a 43%. So we are slightly out of sync with our peers, and that's something that we can only look at in partnership with others, and that's what we are doing. Sorry, I should say through Safer Gloucestershire, there's a subgroup that's been set up to look at that specifically across agencies. And I just wanted to share this chart with you, which is something that was presented to the performance improvement meeting this month. This shows you, I think it's about 37 crimes or groups of crimes, and whether or not we are performing as you would expect compared to our peers. It's a bit complicated, but what you can see in every single crime type, we are within what is called the normal range. So there's nothing jumping out on here that's of particular concern, with the exception of arson. So that's something that the Constabulary are working closely with GFRS about at the moment to tackle. And it's certainly something that I've raised and I highlighted to the community safety partnerships at the last Safer Gloucestershire board as well. So I just wanted to pick that out. So that's quite an interesting picture there. So just in summary, so our organisational developments have meant that we've embedded a culture of performance within both the constabulary and the OPCC. We've done that by investing in an ability and the capability of monitoring performance, which helps us look at the health of the organisation, as I say, at all levels. This has meant that we can be agile and strategic in our responses to performance fluctuations. And we have included in our developments a support for the responsible authorities under the Crime and Disorder Act to help them in their development of plans within the CSPs. In terms of performance, high-level performance trends, so the long and short-term trends, we are generally in line with peers. We are a low crime area. Rural communities are significantly lower in crime, but you can see the impact of the CDI inspection, and hopefully what we've seen in Gloucestershire is very similar to the other forces that have had the same issues, and we will expect to even out like they have done. Our ASB rates continue to be monitored, and as I said, we have a strategic multi-agency group that looks at this, supported by the OPCC under the banner of Safer Gloucestershire. And our current area of work is of concern would be arson, and work is underway with GFRS around that. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ruth. It was very comprehensive and interesting. Of the people I can see, I've got Karen, you've got your hand up.
My question now, yeah. Thanks, that really was very helpful, Ruth. I mean, I tend to challenge you a bit on the performance data in the noughties, having been involved in the development of the Crime and Disorder Act myself. But actually, the lack of a performance framework, I think, has been very difficult for a number of agencies. I guess the question I'm going to ask you really is about the so what question. So you are incredibly data rich, and we're able to see where we are against the family group or whatever, don't we call it in the police. So sounds like those that you're aligned with are very similar too, which is really helpful. But actually the quality of any performance framework is the so what question. The what's the value added that we're going to get for our residents of Gloucestershire. So it's interesting to know where we sit with other people, but actually I'd really like to know how you're using Aspire for better services within Gloucestershire, and you know what quality assurance you do to ensure that the integrity of the data is. I think you've answered that to some extent, but I wonder whether you do dip sampling or whether there's any peer reviews on that.
Yeah. So in terms of our governance structures that I explained there, so there is the so what is this, that is the key question, and that is the question that I ask quite a lot. So okay, so our quality of, I don't know, one of our service quality might be exceptionally good. We might have some great stuff that's going on with responses from our surveys, you know, but so what? What are we learning from that? And I think throughout this framework, we are, as we've mentioned several times in this meeting, moving towards much more of a learning organisation, and that challenging ourselves, challenging the constabulary with the information that we provide. The so what also comes in with the investment in the planning officers that are sitting alongside the managers that are, you know, up to their eyes in actually delivering services, but actually are they delivering it in the best way? The planning officers will support them in monitoring that performance, identifying exceptions, identifying improvement activity, and delivering on that improvement activity as well, making sure they deliver it. So when exceptions do come to our governance boards, you will have a delivery, you have an improvement plan that comes along with it, and those boards will then look to see the developments of that over time. And as I said, our office is involved in that. In terms of dip sampling, as I said, I have access to everything, but actually the constabulary is the data is monitored robustly by things like HMI CFRS. We have a data registrar, for example, client data registrar, and they are responsible for making sure that crimes are recorded in the correct way, and if they're not, that's where you get things like crime data integrity, things that look into it. But so we seek reassurance from the constabulary with that, but we do know there are other external bodies that will look at that specifically as well. And this is something that Martin will continually ask the constabulary about with his holding to account functions as well.
Yeah, thank you, Ruth. Just to add that, very comprehensive answer, a very honest answer. We also get information from the public. We receive quite a lot of letters here. They're reported in the Chief Executive report. We respond and report this back to the local community safety partnerships so they can respond to it. As you know, Karen, I was around in the 90s when performance data was everything. I've lived and breathed it as you have. It's the interpretation of that data down to local level. So you don't just take the figures word for it. You just don't take one person saying, look, there's a huge problem in our rural communities, therefore divert all your attention away from safeguard and away from county lines and put it all in something on the wall. It's that intelligent data which I trust the chief then to respond to. And also when the community raise concerns with me, it is a weekly event. I can say, well, look, this is what the community is saying. What about the reality on the ground, and try to get the right response for the public. And that's the key thing. But you can do anything with data. You know that. You can make it look like the county is a Wild West in any little country village if you pick a particular part of data. And also the way to really do it is real stories. Well, less so at the moment, but I used to go meet a lot of the victims of crime and have their talked experience, so you can really check that the data and what the police are telling you is accurate. And sometimes it's not. Not the data is normally accurate, but I'm not saying the police are dishonest. Of course they're not. But their perception of what a good job is, and particularly witness care and customer care, sometimes doesn't align with the lived experience of a victim of a crime. We've had several. That's what I do. But it's a very good question, and this data is so useful. Not making a point. Well, I'm making a point. We couldn't afford this data in those 800 people we've referred to as part of the organisation. We have to have those to have this data, quality data. So as we grow the organisation by X number of officers, I think it's 46 next year or 45, we need to grow this as well to get a really well-balanced organisation. And that was my challenge to the Chief when he took office. One of the challenges was, Chief, optimise what you've got, get the very best out of everything, and data, and fair play to Ruth and others. This is clever work. Thank you, Karen.
Yeah. I can see Johnny with a hand up.
Thanks, Chair. It is clever work, and I know that Martin's made a comment in the chat, but I don't know if that's picked up on in the minute or anything. And I just wanted to say that it's that was a really excellent report. The standard of the information, but also how it was presented to us, is absolutely first rate, and I think it's really important that we recognise that, and thank you for it. I was struck by the difference in rates of experience of antisocial behaviour and how bothered people are about it. And forgive me for using a ward anecdote, but I'm currently working with a PCSO on an ASB hotspot where I am. And she's told me that it's been going on for so long that people just accept it. And I just wonder if there's kind of a hidden tolerance in the data, and does that mean that we need to be providing more resources for tackling ASB?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, just as an aside, I as I've mentioned before in these meetings, my previous role was in Greater Manchester, and what people tolerated in terms of antisocial behaviour up there, they certainly wouldn't tolerate down here. It would be more viewed as criminality down here, I think, even though there's standards across the board. It's what people feel, and that question of why it's so different is perplexing, really. And it raises alarm bells when it's so low, to be perfectly honest with you. And so there may be an issue around tolerance, and but it's certainly something that we need to look into more. And that's why we are looking at having a survey that mirrors those questions, so we can benchmark against the national benchmarks, but we can drill down into communities. We want to have a demographically representative survey, a piece of consultation, that we can use at district level and beneath that as well. So if we're finding that there are certain groups that are feeling very different or whatever, we can go in and then do some further work with them. At the moment, all we've got to rely on in terms of this type of work, this type of survey, is the national survey. I mean, don't get me wrong, the constabulary does do a lot of work around you know, victim satisfaction and perceptions and everything, but I think it's really important that we have our own survey that we can use for our purposes as well, and to measure really how people are feeling, and that will include, I should just say, perceptions and confidence in policing, in councils, and the criminal justice system as a wider entity.
Thank you. Yeah, just in terms of what Johnny just said, Martin Smith, you put a very helpful comment in the chat, which isn't normally recorded. I didn't know whether you wanted the opportunity to just say that. Did you catch that, Martin? You seem to be on.
Sorry. At that moment, the boiler man came to the front door.
Okay.
I don't need to say more because the meeting's gone on a long time, but these have been very professional presentations and really helpful. And you'll have seen the other comment I made as an aside about the horse presence in the area. So thanks for inviting me, but I won't say any more. And I might have to just say something to my boiler man as well.
No, you see to the boiler. Yeah, that was really interesting, and I think it opens up opportunities for the panel too to actually pick out those areas that we want to concentrate on. And the bit about ASB is, and in some respects picking up Johnny's comment, there are times when we know that having a focus on a particular issue raises the amount of reporting. So I can quite see the topic we started off with really in terms of kind of behaviours towards women. We may well see a rise in ASB as people feel that it's more important that you know, the police and others know just what sort of issues are out there on the street and have the confidence.
Colin, you're absolutely right.
To report it.
No, sorry, I thought you stopped. It just went. I just say you're absolutely right. It just broke up for a second. I thought you stopped, and so I was interrupting you. So I apologise for that. But this data around antisocial behaviour, it's the and crime part of it, because when you see any antisocial behaviour, any of your districts which you have, the solution has to be found within the community, within the parish council, within the school, within the local pub with licensing, all those issues. And I think anybody who's grown up about it realises you can't just blame the police for all the antisocial behaviour. There's deep issues on ACEs, on all the other issues as well. So, you know, when somebody criticises we've got a high antisocial, you know, behaviour in a particular district, you know, we're all held to account for that, the local authority, the police, the PCSOs, each and every one of us. So, you know, and it's a good county as well. I really hope you see, and I don't want to see it bad-mouthed.
No. I've got a hand up from Lorraine. Lorraine, do you want to ask a question or make a comment?
Am I then? Oh, I'm there now. Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick comment. Ruth, you've hit the nail right on the head. People's perception of and tolerance to crime is relative to their own experience. If you've only ever lived in a small place where crime is very low, it sticks out when something happens. If you've been born and brought up where I was, there's a lot more of it. That's it.
Okay. I can't see anyone else. Oh yes, Brian Tipper. Brian.
Thank you, Colin. I must admit, through this meeting, I've been sitting thinking about the role of the police officer at these so-called protests that become almost riots, and or even you could say riots. And my concern is the welfare of the officer itself. I must admit that when I did the job, I was always made aware of the neutrality of an officer at whatever level that they have to maintain. And I would hate to think that there is in that neutrality, that they become vulnerable from, well, for the want of a better word, the mob. And it really does concern me as to what can be done to protect them. And I got one vision of the officer pinned against the, I believe it was the Parliament, with the mob baying to get at him. And I'll be honest with you, that sort of thing has got to stop. It's got to stop simply because if it doesn't, somebody is going to get either seriously hurt or even killed. And frankly, that is my concern. And I guess I'm addressing this to the police force and what can be done at certainly at government level to protect the officer. And that really is predominant in my mind and has been throughout this meeting. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Brian. I think the ACC did say that they take very seriously the welfare and well-being of their officers, and I think we've heard from Martin just how important he feels having the police properly equipped, properly trained, and able to cope in those situations. So there should never be a situation where a police officer is isolated and pinned up against a wall. And it's certainly an issue that I believe the government is it often responds well to incidents of these sorts. So I think we all share your feelings and your concerns about this. And I'm really pleased that during the course of the meeting, we've heard a number of times from the police themselves and from the Police and Crime Commissioner just how important the welfare of our police officers is. But again, Brian, thank you very much for your concerns.
I will just add that Brian, they're kind comments, and absolutely, they were real riots, they were shocking riots. It's also their morale, that they are supported by the police, or are they, or aren't they? I'm not sure. Sometimes, they're certainly supported in Bristol, but they weren't quite so supported in Clapham Common. It's very disturbing. Yeah, it's very disturbing. I've had 35 years of very disturbing things every Saturday night when I went out. So what we're going to do about it, that's the real thing. They get criticised quite a lot, and sometimes rightly. They should be answerable. In this county, I begin, and I'll end as I started off. We need to get behind our police. They are not perfect. We need to tell it as it is. I think we've heard that today. It's a good force. We're blessed to live in a relatively safe area. That is crucial for the recovery from COVID. People see Gloucestershire as a good place to bring up their children. We all have a responsibility. And I know we've got minutes left. We've got to thank people in my team. Count me out of this one. I know that I'm an elected person, but my team work incredibly hard. They really do. The stack of responsibilities they have are huge. Preparing for the Safer Streets Fund this time is a huge amount. Commissioning services for our domestic abuse and sexual violence advice is huge. What Ruth does is massive. They are not spin and waste, as they've been referred to. I will say that, yes, we are coming up to election. They are not spin and waste. I find that incredibly offensive that anyone has actually said that about them. I will fight that tooth and nail, and I hope today we've seen that isn't the case. Thank you, Colin.
Okay, I can't see any other hands up, and that was the last item. And I just want to echo my thanks to the team of the OPCC, because they are your support, they're not your team, and they, like council officers and civil servants, work to whoever's in office.
Absolutely. They can't answer back, so I just did for them how I felt.
Okay, thank you. I do want to give my thanks, and that was a very good and very comprehensive report, Ruth. And whether I'm here or whoever's on the panel in a few months' time, I think that will be an incredibly good source of information for us. So thank you. Oh, sorry, I've got Steve. You've got your hand up.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank you, Colin, for the way that you have chaired the meeting in the last couple of years, and the impartial way that you have chaired, and the knowledge that you have from many years on with the police, working with the police. And thank you for your chairing of this over that period. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And I gave a number of thanks at the beginning, so I won't repeat those. But I hope you all have a good rest of the day, a good recovery from COVID, however that is seen by you all. And hopefully I'll see at least some of you in the future. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
And I'll say goodbye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.